Right. I am calling to order our Eugene Water and Electric Board October 5th, 2021 meeting. We are now in session. We're going to start off with an agenda check, and we don't usually have anything there, but I'm going to propose that we add 20 minutes after public input on our agenda for the commissioners to kind of debrief about the work session we had with the city of Eugene. So I don't know if I need to make a formal motion for that or how that works, but maybe John Brown, you can.
Usually head nods. You get 3 head nods and you can amend the agenda.
Okay, I see some head nods, thumbs up. Okay, so we will add 20 minutes after public input for that item. Is there anything else that anyone else has for agenda check? No. Okay. Then we're going to go right into item number 2, which is items from board members and general manager. So anybody that wants to go first. Go ahead, Sonia.
Hi, this is Sonia Carlson. I wanted to report quickly that I had attended the Lane Council of Governments general meeting last week. It was last week. And wanted to just report back a couple of things. They talked about cybersecurity as one of the issues that they're working on, helping different government entities with, and if there's anything that that we've learned that we might be able to partner with them on, or vice versa, anything to learn from them, that might be something for staff to reach out about. And then another item that we talked about is that the LCC board is going to be selecting a new president. The current president has indicated that they are going to be moving on after this upcoming year, and they have a survey that they've sent out. I will forward that survey. They're trying to get public feedback on that as much as possible. So they sent it out to all the board members and asked that we share that with our members as well. So I will forward that to you, and feel free to share widely as well. That's it for me. Well, I guess I will say thank you for the various tours that we've had over the last few weeks. They've been infinitely helpful. Touring the Hayden Bridge project last Friday, and actually seeing some of the progress and the investments that we've made was really remarkable. So kudos to staff. Thank you. Wonderful to see the lab up and running. Fantastic to see the plant that's generating the hydrochloric. Is it hydric? I'm going to mess it up. It's not chlorine. We got away from chlorine to make this plant. Anyway, so really excited to see that in operation after years of kind of seeing it in construction and such. So thank you.
Anyone else have anything to? Commissioner John Brown.
Yeah, several things. I'm not going to be able to attend the tour of the Finrock Reach. I've been through it quite a bit, but I'm going to be out. I'll be back east. I presented in front of the Northeast neighbors a couple of weeks ago, told them about rates and where we are with certain projects and things such as that. And I'd like to just say that I think it was yesterday, the line crew was working on a substation of the high voltage lines over off of I-105 off of Garden Way. Frank, I don't know the name of that substation, but I pulled over and watched them for 20 minutes, and I have never been more impressed with the safety protocols and the way those guys are in those bucket trucks, 50 feet, 75 feet up off the ground around those high voltage lines. And I just like to just commend them for what I observed to be an incredibly safe, professional group of men and women working up there. It was amazing to watch. It really was. It was the first time I've seen that particular thing and not in a storm event. So kudos to that group. Thank you.
Commissioner Matt McCray.
Thanks, Mindy. A couple of items to mention. I met with Janine Parisi and Laura Harding, EWEB staff up on College Hill, where they provide a presentation to neighbors who are curious about the progress on replacing the water infrastructure there. And they, as always, just did a really nice job of making the information accessible and staying until everybody's questions were asked. I just really appreciate the way our team is active and leans into provide information to our customers. I also want to say thanks to the team. I know there's a significant group of staff who worked on putting together that joint meeting with the city council. And I know that there's a lot that goes into that to making that work and making it flow well. So thanks to the team of staff who were making that work, and also to Mindy for helping to herd the cats during that particular meeting. That was, it was just a lot of logistics, and you made it look effortless. So thanks for your work on that, Mindy. That's all I have.
Commissioner Borowski?
Yeah, not a lot to report. Like John Brown, I attended a neighborhood association meeting, the Fairmount Neighborhood Association meeting. The only thing that really came up there of EWEB interest was the fact that there is a new development going up at the top of Capitol Hill, and there was questions regarding, well, one, they were talking about all the dump trucks that were coming down the hill, and that was something that we knew would be happening, but just as construction is impacting the Hilliard neighbors, construction is also impacting the Fairmount neighbors as well. But one of the things that was a question that came up that I might have to reach out to staff on later was the fact of that there was an agreement with the developers to put in some sort of a infrastructure to make sure that there was enough water for the new developments. So at some point I may be checking with staff to make sure that that is moving forward as was promised to the neighbors. Other than that, nothing.
Frank?
Yes, President Schlossberg, commissioners, good evening. A couple of updates and mostly thank yous. So first of all, I did want to thank the Hayden Bridge crew for their tour the other day, Ray Leipold, Susan Fricke, and Danielle Fisher in particular, for showing commissioners through a lot of the investments, the certified water testing lab, which is incredibly important, and also the on-site hypochlorite manufacturing system, which we now have on site. So thanks to Ray, Susan, and Danielle for their information sharing activities last week. I also wanted to reach out and thank the U of O Soil Plant Atmosphere Research Lab, especially Lucas Silva and Hillary Rose Dawson, for their tour and update on the research that they're doing with EWEB. It's actually really exciting. EWEB is working with the lab to study the long-term impacts of watershed and riparian restoration on carbon sequestration. And we're using our High Banks Road property and working with the U of O on that. It's really exciting research. So I wanted to reach out and thank them and thank staff for their involvement with that. So that was my update. Thank you.
I only have two really small things to add. This is Commissioner Schlossberg. One is I also want to extend my thanks for the Hayden Bridge tour. I found it super interesting, and the enthusiasm of the staff there for all the new stuff that was going on was really great. It hasn't been that long, I think, since I've been on a tour there, because I haven't been a commissioner very long, but there's already so much new stuff there. It was pretty cool to see. So thank you for that. And then my last thing is a really small thing, especially because I'm only presiding over 2 more meetings. But last time, one of our someone who called in for public input just wanted me to be clear on who I was calling on and who was speaking. And just to let you know what's going on in my brain a little bit is that I recognize that I need to use everybody's full name, and at the same time, I'm trying a little harder to be more informal because it kind of breaks down barriers amongst us. So I'm going to kind of flip-flop back and forth. But Commissioner Carlson identified herself when she spoke first, and I think that sometimes that just might be helpful for people who are listening in. I know that's very small, but I just wanted to say that because I wanted to make sure that people who are listening understand that I hear that you want to know who's speaking. Okay. So we're moving on to agenda item number 3, which is public input via telephone. When your name is called, remember to unmute your call. Press *6 if you're calling from a landline, or simply use the unmute button if calling from your cell phone. Please state your name and optionally your address or ward and speak clearly into the phone. Each speaker will be offered 3 minutes to present their testimony. Please keep track of time. You will hear an audio notification when 3 minutes has elapsed. After all testimony is heard, each commissioner will have an opportunity to speak if they choose, although by policy, we do not engage in a back and forth dialogue. Please note that failure of a commissioner to speak shall not be construed as support of or opposition to any speaker's testimony. If a question is presented by a speaker and the board does not provide an answer, an EWEB staff member will contact the speaker so that the question can be addressed at a later time. So, the public testimony period for this meeting is now open. And do we have all of our speakers?
We just had one person join. It looks like it's Mark Robinowicz who is up first. So I'm going to admit him now. And if you'd like to go ahead and call on him and confirm he can be heard, he should be with us in just a second.
Okay, and I have Karen Austin as our first speaker. Is she here?
She has not called in.
Okay. Okay, so first up we have Mark Rabinowitz, followed by Jim New. And Mark, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. So you're up first, followed by Jim New.
Okay, 3 minutes starting now.
Yep.
Okay. Good evening. A couple of things for your consideration. I have heard about your contractor's dump truck getting stuck at the construction site at 40th and Patterson. You may recall a couple months ago, I spoke to your board, noting that there was a small wetland, more or less in the exact spot where your dump truck has gotten stuck. It's an unusual wetland to be at elevation, but it had the largest Oregon ash on the site and rushes and other wetland plants, and seasonal springs tend to get soggy when it rains a couple inches. So it's kind of ironic to have a water tank built on top of a former wetland, but then EWEB built your whole new compound out in West Eugene in the middle of wetlands, so maybe it makes sense. I know of another state that was forced to require covers for dump trucks after a state legislator had his windshield cracked by rocks flying out of a similar truck, and hope that EWEB will require its contractors to put covers on the dump trucks. I guess with the rain, the dust is lower now, but rocks flying out is still a problem. And you're going to be discussing the second source. If EWEB had paid more attention to maintenance of your big tanks, we might be seeing construction of the second intake now, instead of scrambling to address broken tanks on College Hill and Hawkins Hill. You have 23 tanks total around the city, and I find it hard to believe that you couldn't find any configuration that would allow existing sites to be sufficient for water storage for the community. And during your public hearing tonight on the long-term plans for EWEB, I will talk about energy depletion and peak electricity and how the Western electric grid that we're all on uses a lot more fossil fuels than solar panels and wind turbines. That is basic physics, and it would be nice to acknowledge that green electricity is basically an oxymoron. So that's my comments for the public input right now, and I'll stay on the line, muted.
Great, thank you very much. So next up, we have Jim New, followed by Linda Kelly.
Hello, Commissioners and General Manager Lawson. My name is Jim New. I live in Ward 7. Thank you for the opportunity to give public comment. I was encouraged by the EWEB and City Council joint work session, and I hope there are more to come. Frankly, there were many unanswered questions, so I hope that they should be held more often than just quarterly. 87% of fossil gas is made up of methane, which is 84% more potent than carbon dioxide in a 20-year period, and has caused 30% of global heating. According to a UN report, cutting methane emissions is the quickest way to slow global heating. In the United States, 590 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent were generated by homes and businesses, 9% of the total U.S. greenhouse gases in 2018. For the 2022 Energy Star Most Efficient Appliance list, the EPA just announced it will not include gas furnaces, boilers, or dryers for the first time. The list is only electric appliances. We cannot continue to install new gas appliances that will be around for 10 to 30 years, considering the climate crisis we're currently experiencing. I trust the competent staff and the commissioners at EWEB will develop energy policy that makes economic, social, and reliable sense for generations to come. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you very much. Next up, Linda Kelly, followed by Dylan Plummer.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I live in Ward 1. I also want to thank whoever fixed the electronics on the meeting the other day between the city and EWEB. I appreciate that. It took a little bit. I also want to thank City Councilor, Councilor Surratt, and Commissioner Matt McCrae, Sonia Carlson, and Mindy Schlossberg, who spoke at that time and addressed with some good questions the wisdom of the dual source heat pumps. Frank Lawson gave an interesting presentation, but I had no clear explanation of why he would be interested in a dual energy heat pump. I couldn't understand that. We know that natural gas is on the way out and that we must electrify everything as quickly as possible from all of the recent reports that have been coming our way. Northwest Natural, I believe, is hoping to be the Trojan horse with this dual heat pump and be able to create more opportunities for themselves to getting natural gas into homes, as our city is hopefully about to pass some sort of an ordinance to actually reduce any new hookups. So I just wanted to thank the people who spoke up. It's a terrible idea, the dual source, and not really understanding why Director Lawson would be interested in those. Another thing I'd like to bring up, I stopped by the Rental Owners Association office the other day to ask them what they thought may be the best way to support electric heat pumps into rental properties. We had an interesting conversation. I learned that EWEB was formerly a member, but somehow that had slipped away in the last few years, and they're no longer a member. They were really disappointed with this, and they felt that for the yearly $250 approximate membership, EWEB could have the opportunity to be putting in monthly articles in their newsletter, which goes out to landlords across Lane County about the opportunities and benefits of electric heat pumps. So I would really like to put that on your radar, and hopefully you will rejoin that and take that opportunity to really reach out to all of the rental property owners. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Dylan Plummer, followed by Phil Barnhart. Are you there, Dylan? All right, he had said he needed to slip out of the meeting, so we'll come back to him. So we will go to Phil Barnhart, followed by Madeline Cohen.
President Schlossberg, Commissioners, General Manager Lawson. My name is Phil Barnhart. I live in Ward 3. I've been a lifetime resident of Eugene, my children and grandchildren. also live here, and the grandchildren attend school in Eugene. I was an 18-year state representative, and among other things, I served on the Energy and Environment Committee. After hearing the last two speakers, I realized that what I want to say is fairly simplistic, but it's really important to pay attention, I think, to the urgency with which we face the current problems. The international, the IPCC has said very recently that we have 10 years to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by half. And by 2050, we have to get to zero. And in order to avoid catastrophe. We have no chance at all of saving our civilization and maybe even our species with the relaxed response that I have seen by public agencies up till now. I've been watching the response to the governor's executive order on the climate emergency. The city council had a plan 10 years ago, which has not been implemented. And so it goes. We're out of time, but there are some basic principles that you can follow to be laser focused on your part to solve the climate problem. Number one, EWEB must work with the city to stop adding methane gas to our energy mix. There is no time for half measures. My recommendation, tell the city council to prevent new methane gas hookups now, and tell the council that EWEB will take up the slack and then do it yourselves. There are lots of ways, you know better than I do what they are, in order to actually provide the basics that we need in order to continue serving our community. Number two, tell the council that EWEB and the city must quickly develop a plan to phase out existing methane gas use in the city, and then gear up to get that done. Others will tell you how to do it, and some of them already have. But keep those two ideas in mind. We don't have any time to wait. If we get ahead of the curve, we will be saving money, and with gas prices going up, that's really important, and getting the limited supply of electric appliances that will be available. Those that want gas for their new buildings may grumble a bit, but they'll be thanking you later for avoiding the cold winters and the expensive retrofits that they otherwise will have to do, that Jim New already referred to.
Thank you very much. Thank
you.
Yeah, thank you. Next up, we have Madeline Cohen, followed by Danny Noonan.
Hi there. My name is Madeline Cohen. I'm a resident of Ward 2 and an EWEB customer for many years. President Schlossberg and Vice President Brown and Commissioners Carlson, McRae, and Borowski, thank you for the opportunity to provide this testimony. Again, I kind of jumped around a little bit there, but my name is Madeline Cohen, and I'm also the grassroots organizer with Cascadia Wildlands, who is part of the growing Fossil-Free Eugene Coalition. I'm testifying today to request that members of the EWEB Commission or the Commission as a whole come out to correct the record after Frank Lawson's misleading presentation to City Council about the utility's stance on electrification and its ability to handle the associated load increases. In fact, I believe that the EWEB Commission should condemn General Manager Frank Lawson's proposal to the City Council and any proposal that would expand gas infrastructure in our city. With dramatic wildfire and other extreme weather events hitting the news all the time, it's become absolutely apparent that climate change is no longer an imminent threat, but a current reality that communities, and especially low-income and Black, Indigenous, people of color communities across Oregon are experiencing. It's also apparent that getting off fossil fuels is the #1 way that we can mitigate this crisis. Homes and buildings consume nearly 43% of all energy in Oregon and cause about 1/3 of the state's climate pollution. It is the second largest source of climate pollution after the transportation sector. This comes from gas burns in furnaces, water heaters, stoves, and dryers, all in our home. Repowering our buildings to run on clean, high-efficiency energy electric appliances instead is absolutely key to stemming the worst impacts of climate change. And doing this work can also support jobs in communities everywhere, including here in Eugene. In light of this and many other scientifically backed reasons for transitioning off fossil fuels, I would like to again urge the EWEB commissioners to publicly condemn Mr. Lawson's completely irresponsible proposal to the City Council this past Monday, which would connect more homes to fossil fuel gas infrastructure in what we strongly believe is a coordinated effort with Northwest Natural to avoid regulation and create clear policy to direct EWEB staff to support efforts for electrification to avoid situations like this in the future. Again, and Dylan Plummer, the Sierra Club Senior Campaign Representative, also who's working on building electrification in Oregon and Washington, he asked me, sent me an email to read into the record his request for the EWEB commissioners to publicly announce their support for building electrification policies to transition the city of Eugene off of fracked gas. Thank you so much for your consideration and for all of your work on behalf of our community. I really, really appreciate it. And I look forward to supporting EWEB to lead the state on policy to ensure a just transition off of fossil fuels into 100% renewable electricity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Last, we have Danny Noonan, and if Dylan Plummer is able to come back to this call, we can end with him. But next, Danny Noonan.
Mr. Noonan has not joined the meeting, President Schlossberg.
All right, and is Dylan Plummer here?
No, he has not joined either.
Okay. So I believe that is all of our speakers. So the public testimony period for this meeting is now closed. At this time, commissioners are given the opportunity to comment if they choose. So is there anybody, you can raise your hand, commissioners, if there's anyone who would like to comment. John Borowski.
Thank you, President Schlossberg. John Borowski. And thank you, everybody, for coming out and testifying today. As somebody who stood on that side of the microphone several times, not before this board very much, but in front of the City Council, I know how difficult that can be sometimes to fit everything in 3 minutes. I guess my question would be to Frank Lawson. The woman brought up the fact that we used to be a member of the Renters Coalition and that might be a way for us to reach rental property owners. I would hope that we could look into that. I mean, if it is only $250 and that gives us an avenue to get into landlords to help get our word out there, I think that would be something that I would like to have looked into. I know that that's one of the things that I struggle with, is trying to get efficiencies and electrification into rental units. So if that's an opportunity that we can look into, I would hope that we can pursue it.
Commissioner Borowski, we will absolutely look into that. I don't know if or why we dropped our membership, but given the challenge with rentals and the amount of rental stock in Eugene, I think it's a good opportunity to explore, and I'll follow back up with the board before next meeting.
Thanks. Sonia.
Hi, thanks again, all for testifying this evening. Real quickly, Mark, in case you hadn't seen, did ask a question during the pre-meeting questions about covering the dump trucks and progress there. So it is something that, I and others are certainly paying attention to. Want to make sure that project is, low impact as much as it can be on the 40th and Patterson residents. And then to all of the others who've come and testified, especially around natural gas and the City Council meeting, I'm going to save most of my comments for the 20 minutes that we added, because I think a lot of this is a process question. And some of that information that I want to share and talk about, I think is better reserved for that space. So I hope that I'm encouraging you all to stick around for that kind of next 20 minutes that we're saving, because I really do think that we'll get a good discussion out of that and how we interact with the city and where we want to go with these proposals. It's certainly something I know many of us care about. So thank you.
Matt, go ahead.
Thanks, Cindy. Matt McRae. I just want to say thank you all for taking the time to come and provide testimony. And I guess I'll join Sonia in saying that if you hadn't heard, Commissioner Schlossberg had proposed that we add 20 minutes to the agenda immediately following this public input. So we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more and debrief about that council and board collective meeting. There was a lot of content there and a lot of strong opinions, and there's kind of a lot to unpack. So thank you all for weighing in and encouraging us to to support decarbonization in this community, and look forward to the coming conversation.
I'm going to go ahead first, Frank. So this is Commissioner Schlossberg. Yes, and again, thank you everybody for calling in for public testimony. I just wanted to address one small thing that I think Jim New maybe said, or somebody said about hoping that this wasn't the only work session that we had around this issue. And one idea that's been thrown around in our leadership meetings with the City of Eugene is potentially having another more in-depth work session around electrification, perhaps later in the fall or maybe the winter, and more of like on a Saturday or something that could be a little bit longer and in person when we can be in person. So there's nothing that's been scheduled yet, but we did talk about it. So this, hopefully, I agree, wasn't just a one-off thing. And General Manager Lawson, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, President Schlossberg. I would like to address, before we get to the meeting, I think the meeting, there's a lot of content to discuss there, but since a number of people in public testimony addressed the fact that the board should condemn me for my irresponsible comments, I thought I would at least take the opportunity to address that. I went out to a website this afternoon. It's a local website, and they actually went a little bit further. They said that the board should fire General Manager Frank Lawson for his clear collaboration with the fossil fuel industry and work to undermine the meaningful climate action in the City of Eugene. So I guess, first of all, I just want to be clear about something. I am working with and collaborating with other people in the industry. I serve on committees with Avista. I serve on committees with Puget Sound Energy. And I have been collaborating and talking with Northwest Natural on several topics, including renewable hydrogen, dual fuel heat pump technology, and the potential for carbon offset investments in our watershed, but certainly not to undermine meaningful climate action. I have to work with a lot of different people on a lot of different levels. And all of this has been consistent with past direction and policy. So I just want to be clear and open that, yes, I have been working and talking with Northwest Natural, just to be clear about that. I also just want to be clear that we have never not supported electrification. In fact, if you look at EWEB, we have over 50 different energy efficiency, conservation, and electrification programs. Everything from electric vehicle charging incentives to things related to the watershed, rental projects, and all kinds of different, heat pump, hot water heater incentives. There's just so many programs that we do that I think we have shown through our actions that we support it. And so I just wanted to be clear about that. And my proposal to the city, and I'll take ownership of my contribution to the unproductiveness of the meeting. My proposal to the city council and to EWEB commissioners for that matter was it was a proposal to potentially develop a proposal if there was interest in it. I've been exploring dual fuel technology for for quite a while because it helps us address some of the issues associated with electrification. I'm not an advocate for it necessarily. I'm not an opponent of it. To me, it was an option. And I didn't propose that it was to be done. I didn't advocate for it to be done. I simply said it's worth exploring. And so, you know, just with that context, it's interesting the response that I have gotten and that the commissioners have gotten around that. One thing that we do have in our values is the very first one, and it says we value the physical and psychological safety of our employees and the public. And when we actually surveyed employees as to what psychological safety meant, it meant the ability to offer up alternative perspectives or even opposing views without reprisal or retaliation. And I find it really interesting. I'm used to being grilled on subjects. In fact, almost everywhere I go, I get grilled on a subject. I think I kind of get used to it. But to me, what does it say to our employees and to other members of the public when by simply offering up, not endorsing, just offering up an alternative for evaluation, that the general manager gets chastised, or to use their word, condemned by certain members of the public, especially in a community that boasts about its diversity and inclusion. And I just find that pretty ironic. I am absolutely not a climate denier. I believe we have a real and urgent problem in front of us, and it's going to take some creative collaboration and innovation for us to make progress on this. But we also have to be willing to explore options and ideas, because if we do it wrong, we're going to take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And that to me is the scary part. We can actually, if we do this right, we can make progress that's sustainable and not do something that we then have to take back later. And so I just wanted to explain to people, since they commented on it, and I really do appreciate it. I listen to it, I hear it. I genuinely care about what people think and the direction that this city is going. But since that was addressed to me, I thought I would address it. The rest of my comments will be around the meeting and how we can do that better in the future. And I'll own my part to the meeting, certainly, for teeing up such an interesting topic for discussion. But I just wanted to respond, since I saw that formally out there, that people were calling for my condemnation and for my firing based on the fact that I proposed an idea. So thank you, President Schlossberg. I appreciate the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Well, that is a nice segue into our next discussion. So we'll put 20 minutes on the clock to kind of debrief about that work session. I'm just gonna go first, if that's okay with everybody. And I just want to say that these Zoom meetings are really difficult. I just want to acknowledge that. And to have a work session with 2 different entities on a remote meeting is especially difficult. And I know we're going to have a lot to talk about, but I just think that kind of lays the foundation for the dissatisfaction that some people had felt with that meeting. It's really hard. I mean, even in our regular meetings, when we're each given, 2 or 3 minutes to say our piece, it's not really a dialogue. And so I found the work session to be particularly difficult because it's just like we're talking to the camera, and it wasn't in the spirit of like collaborating and asking and answering questions. So if we have any more of these remote work sessions, perhaps we can figure out a way to do it differently. But that was like kind of my base frustration with that meeting. But I know that other people have things that they want to say and delve into topics, so I'll leave my part at that right now. And I'm wondering if there's anybody. I'm seeing Sonia's hand going up. So Sonia.
Thank you so much. And Frank, I really appreciate, the comments that you had there. And, my intention in any of this, I understand and fully trust where you've been coming from. It's really hard when we're looking at information for the first time. Generally in our EWEB meetings, that is the cadence that we have. Staff presents options. We get to vet them as EWEB commissioners. We get to think about the ideas. We say, positives and negatives, pros and cons, and then we pick solutions and we move forward with that. And that's an open and proactive and respectful environment. And I feel like there's a different expectation at the city level. And I think, moving forward, we have to have these conversations. We just need to figure out how to do it with them better because we have policies in place. I know that staff and all of us care very deeply about moving forward on carbon mitigation and how we do that to support this. What I would recommend, I have kind of a list of responses here quickly, or learned lessons in doing this better. I think one, we absolutely have to figure out ahead of time, we have to have our own proposal to put forth for them and say, this is what we would really like the city to do. Not just a list of options that we can work with, but this is what we need from an EWEB perspective and in order to make that work, we think that the city needs to do X, Y, and Z. And that's how we present it. And then we have a conversation maybe about that proposal instead of more vague options, because we didn't see all of those options, and that I think was confusing. And it's such a quick meeting. They have such limited time. We get to delve really deep into energy and water topics, and they have to do everything from homelessness to carbon policy. They just don't have the bandwidth to do that. So we need to be very clear and concise, and we need to do the front end work up front to figure out how to make that happen. Knowing the time frame up front, that was one that we didn't. I thought we were going until 7:30, and then the meeting just stopped, so we didn't get to follow up on that. We typically have 3 minutes, whereas they have 2 minutes. It's a very different cadence. So, lesson learned there. We ask questions in different ways. I also think it would just be very, very helpful if in the future, when we do these sorts of meetings, staff give the presentation to us. We do kind of a debrief on what that looks like. We select the policy and just to get on that same page really ahead of time with what all of the parameters are that we're looking for. We get such limited time with them that we really got to make it count. So I think that's on us to really do that work ahead of time in the future. I'm not going to forget. No, I don't think any of us are going to forget that in the future, but I really do appreciate the conversation. Finally, I'd like to bring up, in the next round, if there is a next round, I'd like to have one more comment about SD 15 and potentially amending it. Okay.
Great.
Thanks.
Who would like to go next, or who has anything to add? Frank.
Thank you, President Schlossberg. So first of all, I do want to acknowledge that we have a really good relationship with City Manager Sarah Maderi and staff. The meeting was very awkward. At best, it might have been considered unproductive. I think at worst, it was probably very frustrating for a number of the participants. But I wanted to acknowledge that Sarah and her staff and EWEB staff work on all kinds of things together all the time in a very productive way and supportive way. So I want to be really clear that that doesn't get lost in this. I also, in the vein of continuous improvement and looking at things, there's an opportunity to improve. And I, as critical as I might want to be about the meeting, I also need to own up to my contribution to that. First of all, I teed up a subject into an environment that, Commissioner Carlson called it the cadence. I would classify it maybe the culture of the atmosphere or the environment, which is much different than what we are used to. We are used to exploring ideas. There's a proposal, there's a discussion, there's a direction, and I made the tactical mistake of doing that into an environment that was not used to that, and I have to own up to that. So, and therefore, you know, being able to make a proposal into that environment, you know, in hindsight, not surprisingly, it created some division within the meeting. It brought out positions and other things. So I really need to take some personal accountability for that, and I do, and we'll learn from that. I also, you know, think that as we go forward, I do think that it would be better for the board to present the board's position. I sometimes feel a little bit like in those settings that I'm coming from a different perspective than commissioners or the board at large or in aggregate in total. It is one of the differences that I have from the board. Each board member can communicate or opine pretty freely on different subjects. I have to, when I present things or talk about things, can't, you know, adjust my story. I have to provide the full answer to everybody I might be talking with, and it has to be the aggregate view per se, or what I've been authorized to do. So it's a little bit different, and so you know, I just think there's a lot of opportunities to improve. I think that Commissioner Carlson was onto something really, really important, which is I think it's important for us to align before we try to align with somebody else. And the other thing I would like to reiterate is the city's making some really important decisions that do impact us, and we probably make decisions that impact them. And they really would like to encourage both council leadership and EWEB board leadership to develop some kind of method of which we can provide formal and vetted responses to each in between entities. I think that would be, there's in some of these subjects, they're so complex that hearsay drives the answer. And really we need to develop more formal and vetted responses to some of these issues than, oh, this person feels this way, or Frank said that, or, you know, someone else said this. I think there's got to be a way to clean that up. And so offering up some suggestions, but I will own my part about teeing up something that into the wrong environment at the wrong time. And thus you heard some of the feedback that came from that. So I'll own that.
Thank you, Frank. John Brown.
Thank you. I probably have a different perspective than some, but that's okay. It's my perspective. I saw nothing wrong with what General Manager Lawson did at the City Council meeting. He had an idea. He just said, "What if I come back in 6 weeks and give you a proposal to maybe do a study?" It wasn't saying we're going to do a study. We're not going to do this. If we're to the point that we can't ask questions and look at different perspectives, then what, you know, we get a much better bang for the buck in electrifying the transportation sector. I haven't heard one word about that, and why not? And if all of a sudden the transportation sector comes to us and say, we have a new dual fuel car that can get 5 times the mileage, are we going to say nope, can't consider it because it's something else introduced? That we, you know, I think we have to be able to at least have the discussion and not be afraid of that discussion and not be pushed around and said, oh, we can at least talk, because that's not the way we do this, at least in my opinion. And, you know, Jim New has always been very respectful, and I really have a lot of respect for him and his viewpoints and things. And he talked about, you know, doing this more quarterly. This is the first meeting we've had with council in over 3 years. We have not had a joint meeting with council since then. We've had the quarterly meetings that leadership does, but as far as sitting around the table, I think the last time I did it was 3 years ago, and that's a long time. We used to go to them quarterly. We used to, the board president used to always go to the podium and say, this is where we are, this is what we're doing, to the council meetings. And then sometimes the speaker list got 30 long and nobody wanted to spend 3 hours there waiting for 2 minutes. And that stopped. But yeah, to have that dialogue with council, especially, and you know, in my opinion, we need to stop fighting and start, working together, because right now I saw a huge divide there, and that's not the way we're going to get this accomplished. We all get climate change, we all get decarbonization and everything else. It's just that we got to stop this this visceral communication, in my opinion. So we're moving forward, and I'm looking forward to others' opinions. Thank you.
Matt, go ahead.
Thanks, Mindy. I have a number of thoughts. Thanks for your comments, Frank. I appreciate you addressing the comments from the public testimony that we had. I want to also say that I'm super grateful for the discussion that we have at this board. Even in public, in front of everybody, we have sometimes messy, uncomfortable conversations, and I think that's really healthy and hard at the same time. And I'm super grateful to be on a board that can have this kind of conversation. I agree with Mindy about the challenges of the Zoom environment, both for public testimony, but also for our conversations. It's just not ideal, and I look forward to in-public meetings or in-person meetings when we can resume that. I also, even with in-person meetings, meeting with that many elected officials who all want to, make a statement or ask a few questions, it's just, there's just 90 minutes can't possibly be enough for us to really kind of chew on anything in a meaningful way. And so I think Mindy had proposed, maybe we take a different way to organize ourselves in future conversations. I think that's a great idea. I also just appreciate Sonia's comments across the board. Sonia, I feel like you're right on. Thank you for your comments. I'm not going to repeat them, but I think you're right on. I think part of the issue and part of the reason that it's so heated is that we're so late in turning the ship. We've been so addicted to fossil fuels for so long, and there's been so little real transformational shift. And it's at such a late stage that I think the anxiety and the urgency just bleeds over into conversation, and it's really hard to have frank conversations that are productive, because we needed to turn 30 years ago, and we haven't. And so the ability to make small shifts in course corrections, it's a late hour, and that can be really hard for people to swallow. So I think that's part of kind of what gets interjected into a conversation like we had last week. I would agree that I think Frank said it. I think it's a great idea that we all get on the same page before we go to another policy group, whether the city or anybody else. So I appreciate that intent. Two last things. We do have a climate policy. For those who haven't seen it, I think it's worth taking a look at our climate policy number 15. As Frank pointed out, we have incentives for EVs. We incentivize electrification of buildings. We have incentivized efficiency and conservation. So we are taking steps. I think that it could be valuable for us to clarify our intent about those policy statements with clear and measurable goals. I think that would make it easier for everybody to see where this utility is wanting to go. And lastly, just as a point of clarification, and this is, Frank, this is just clarification with you. I know you and I have talked a number of times about a whole host of things, and I appreciate the candid conversations that we have. And the conversation about my proposal was to go to the board, which was, about providing an increasingly renewable gas into the gas pipeline. So, you and I are thinking the same way there, in that if we could get renewable gas into the pipeline, it would decarbonize our economy. However, that proposal was put forward a few years ago, and I had high hopes that Northwest Natural would step up to the plate and show us that that's where they want to go. But I just don't see any indication that they're prepared to turn as quickly as is now necessary. And so for me, it feels risky for us to continue to make assumption or hope that they're going to provide a renewable gas pipeline. That would be amazing, and I if there's a way for that to happen, great. But I don't know that. I personally don't feel like I can put my eggs in that basket any longer. Anyway, thanks very much for the time for this conversation. And Mindy, thanks for proposing the time to debrief here.
John Borofsky.
Thank you. I'm just going to kind of give my input on dealing with the Eugene City Council. I've been on several boards and commissions that reported to the City Council, advisory boards. I was on the Budget Committee for 8 years, and I was on the Planning Commission for 8 years. And I think that might be a template to kind of work for in upcoming meetings. If the City Council had come to us and said, give us your views on electrification and how EWEB can help us get along with our climate action goals using electrification. And that was the basis for that work session. I think that we could have done that. We could have done that as commissioners, and we could have done that as staff. But to like some of the other commissioners have said, if you go in there and you've got 13 elected officials all trying to make a point, it doesn't work. So going forward, I think we can be used as a very responsible and valuable advisory committee to the city in certain areas. And it can go both ways. We can do the same to them. We can ask them and their staff to give us guidance and help in achieving some of the goals that we have. Things like getting rentals to be more efficient. Are there ways that we can do that with building permits? And we can go to them and say, what can we do to help achieve our goals? And then have that as the topic of the work session. I think that might be a way to move forward if we're going forward with other work sessions, rather than just putting out a bunch of information and then have everybody weigh in on it. I think if we go forward with a specific goal for a work session, I think that would be something that would be advantageous. And then lastly, I'm just going to let people know I'm going to turn my camera off because my wife just made me dinner and I don't want to be on camera chewing in front of everybody. So I will be listening and contributing, but for the next 5 or 10 minutes, I'm going to have some dinner.
I hope it's delicious. I know that Sonia had said that she had a proposal. Is it okay if we just give her, Frank, did you want to say something before Sonia, we turn it over to Sonia?
I think I will say it after Sonia. I think I know what she's going to, part of what she might say. So I'll go after.
Okay, go ahead, Sonia.
Okay, thanks. I've been pinging Frank all day long to get on questions. So SD15, just like Matt said earlier, I've been curious about actually putting quantifiable goals into SD15. Earlier, I asked Frank about that policy to make sure I had the most up-to-date one, and it doesn't appear to have those goals, reduction of, 50% by 2030, 50% compared to 2009 levels below by 2030. That kind of statement. Apparently, Frank let me know that there was a resolution that EWEB adopted back in 2011 that had some of those kind of characteristics. I wanted to find out if tonight, if we could get head nods from at least a few other commissioners to ask staff about actually putting those quantifiable goals into SD15, just so we can just reaffirm it. That's the one that we always refer to as our climate policy, and I think it would just be really helpful to combine those together. Unless there are thoughts that Frank has had since then that would make it so that we can't do that. But are there head nods? Is there interest in even doing that? Okay, I see a couple others, and looks like John has a question.
I do. Are we going to try and measure the triple bottom line analysis on this and the equity analysis by putting, hard numbers to this to say, what does this do to the affordability? What does it do to the equitability and all of those things before we do this? Because if we do this, this is kind of on a whim. We talk about bringing, our earlier conversation talked about, Frank was chastised for bringing something to the board or to a group and not having any prior discussion or anything else. And unless I'm missing something, that's exactly what we're doing right now. And I'm not understanding this. And what am I missing, Sonia? Because help me.
One, I mean, this was a resolution that already passed in 2011. We're just reaffirming it in our most up-to-date policy. Frank already reported to me that this is something that they report to us in December of every year anyway. But what it does is it puts it into one place. Now, Frank, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that was my understanding from earlier.
So
this is not intended in any way to be a chastisement. It's meant to be more of a reaffirmation to us that this is what we're about, and also to people who are attending tonight that this is the policy that we work with and what staff have been reporting on. So it's very easy for them to see what we are about and what we do. So that's the intent of it. There's no chastisement here. This is so.
I'll elaborate a little bit, Sonia. There's no, you didn't make any misstatements there at all. The climate change policy that we have, which people refer to as SD15, contains 5 different elements. One of those elements has to do with decarbonizing our own operations. That's the particular piece, and only that piece is the one that has actual numbers that started back in 2011, where we are to reduce, and in fact, I think the number was 25% by 2020, which we achieved, and I think we're actually at 50%. That has to do with only one element of SD15, which was our own operations. I'll actually talk a little bit more about SD15 and the process. There's a couple of ways that the board can do this. One of the ways would be to direct staff to come back with various things that you feel are missing, or look for opportunities in SD15. It's a little bit awkward for staff to do that on a board policy because this is your policy as a board, and it might be better to actually have a facilitated discussion at a future board meeting specifically around SD15 and where the board would see opportunities. It's a little bit different than some of the other things we do where we bring you 2 or 3 options and there's some discussion. This is actually a board policy. I can see where there's some need for clarification, and I'll just use one example because it's very relevant in my mind at the moment. And that's that when we talk about helping our community decarbonize, we use the expression smart electrification. Smart electrification has no defined meaning. So part of what even our studies the last couple of years have tried to accomplish is to define what do we mean by smart electrification. There are some people, including board members, which I have a great deal of respect for, believe that all electrification is now smart electrification, and that's okay. I think this is a board policy that if some specific, and I think Commissioner McCray said the reasoning, spoke of the reasoning behind what we're shooting for and why, and what's our target out there. I'm okay with that. I think that's fine. What we will do if we want to turn it into measurements is that we'll have to be pretty precise around, versus, what is, how are we going to do the carbon accounting? How are we going, what baseline are we going to use? Does this include just EWEB operations or EWEB electricity supplied, or is it more than that? Or is it community based? Is it regional based? I mean, there's a lot of questions that come along with that. But I think there is an opportunity for the board to look at SD15. Ann Caw and I just actually decided to add something to the annual calendar, and that's that we feel like on an annual basis, the board should have the opportunity to review all board policies. Not that any time in between you couldn't do anything specific. I think that's okay too, but at least once a year, and we pick December because it's usually Deborah Hart's asking for money, and that's about it. We can, we should be able to review on an annual basis all of the policies that are board policies and look for opportunities to improve it. We could either do it then, or if the board wants to allocate time in November, you could do it that. There's a number of different different mechanisms. But I think Commissioner Carlson, I think I explained that there is this 2011, but it's only one element of the climate change policy.
All right, any comments? I think what I heard is a proposal by Sonia to delve deeper into SD15 and add some measurable goals or some metrics to it. And then I heard kind of a counter proposal maybe from John Brown that we need to look not just at carbon targets, but also the equity issue, and to figure out, like, I guess basically to take a deeper dive into SD15. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, and I'd like to apologize for maybe I was misunderstood, because if we're going to go in and just go back and reinstate what we had in 2011 about our operations and those metrics, that's a no-brainer for me to putting that back in there. I misunderstood you, Sonia. I thought that you said that we were going to try and, because I know there's some effort to try and say, okay, we're going to have no carbon in our entire electric portfolio. And I want, we can talk about that, but I want to talk about the economics of it and the equitability portion of it too. So I'm totally open to go back into SD15. I'm totally open to go back to the 2011 metrics on operations. So no problem there with me.
President Schlossberg, what I think I've heard is a desire, and I think I saw 3 head nods to what I would call open up SD15 for more discussion with the board. Where I see a lot of carbon policy going actually is to establish targets, but also have some off ramps or adjustability to it. You see that in a lot of the carbon legislation. For example, recently the cap and trade in Washington State and others, where here's this goal, but there's also some consideration for reliability and affordability in that. And so it should be an interesting discussion, but what I think I've got, the conclusion that I can draw is the board would like to open that up. And I guess I would ask the board, is December too late, or should we try to rearrange some things to get that into November? I guess that would be the question I would have.
Do we have any open work session times, or are they all filled already?
I believe they're filled. We only have one right now in October. I don't know that we have one in November with Thanksgiving. It's a little more of a challenge. And it could be that this takes a couple of different sessions, quite honestly, given the complexity of this particular one. And if you want, I can work with ANCAW and some others to look at what the schedule could permit. Maybe there's at least an opening in November, and then further discussion if needed for some periods of time after that.
All right, really quickly, some last thoughts. Sonia.
Just real quick. I will warn all of you who have not been through this before. November and December's board packets are already like 400 or 500 pages because of the budget. If we add it in that time frame, I don't know that we will be able to give it the due bandwidth that it will deserve. I know that I'm bringing it up, and I would like to get it on the agenda. Obviously, we want this to be sooner rather than later because it's something that we have at the tip of our minds. But I would rather give it the amount of thought that it needs, and also get that reporting that they typically do in December around it, and propose that January's meeting is usually very quick. In many respects. I don't know if that's exactly the best time because we typically have a turnover there, but it's usually a much smaller meeting. Maybe, something in that time frame. I'll leave it up to the people who set the agenda. I mean, for me, I'm fine when you can make it work, but I do want to make sure that we have the bandwidth and memory to be able to do it well.
And I would agree with that, Commissioner Carlson. I also have a sense of urgency from my perspective, because we are doing a lot of work, and the same group that I would like to get moved off of the electrification piece onto integrated resource planning. Some of those kinds of policies provide input and direction to things like that. So I have a bit of a sense of urgency around this as well. I hate to, sort of speed up the board because I do know that there's kind of hundreds of pages, but maybe this is not one discussion. It's probably several discussions.
John Brown.
I'm open to extra meetings. I've heard and Matt reiterated it better that this can's been kicked down the road too long. And if this is very important. We need to talk about it. Let's talk about it. That's our job. And that's why we signed up for this. And so if we have to have extra meetings, as much as they're challenging for us and for staff, let's do it, because we can't be wrong on this. We got to get this right. We got to do it right. So I agree. If we have to have more meetings, let's have more meetings. And if that's, Mindy and I will, I think we will look at the calendar and see if we can't do it.
All right, Matt or John Borofsky, do you have any last thoughts before we move off this topic?
Yeah, I'll go quickly. I'm definitely on board with this, but I also want it to be well thought out. I don't want to just throw goals out there and numbers out there, because I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen at the city of Eugene, where they threw numbers out, and then 2 years later they came back and said, oh, those numbers aren't good enough. We need to change those numbers. I like the idea of being able to show progress towards decarbonization in our community, but being tied to specific numbers that we have to abide by, like the city has in their ordinances, I think sometimes can hamstring us. So I want it to be well thought out. And so the urgency, yes, I believe in urgency, but I also want staff to have enough time to put together a well thought out presentation and give us some things to actually chew on and have a well-reasoned policy going forward.
All right, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Mindy. Just briefly, again, super appreciative of this group and the ability to just wrestle conversations. Thank you all. In terms of time frame, I'm open to additional meetings too, if that feels like a productive way for us to move the ball down the field, and increments, a little bit during each of the next few minutes or few meetings seems appropriate. Trust Frank and Mindy and John for you all to find a schedule that works for us, and I appreciate the urgency that everybody has, generally to try and make sure we can get something on the books soon. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. That was way more than 20 minutes, but I really appreciate actually the conversation and the back and forth, and I think that this was really productive and helpful. And I think that we're really lucky that we have a good working relationship, that we can talk through these issues, and even though we have differences of opinions, that we can figure out a way to move forward. So we'll look at getting some things scheduled so that we can take a deeper dive into SD 15. And thank you, everybody, for that great discussion. But now we can shake it off and move back into regular business. And we are moving on to board action items. So approval of consent calendar A.
Move to approve.
Second.
Great. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. Consent calendar A is approved. Next, we're going to move on to approval of consent calendar B.
Move to approve.
Second.
All right. All those in favor.
Question.
Say aye. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Is that the one that includes the investment policy? I think it is, right?
Yeah. Did you have a question about that?
Just an observation. The edits that are proposed in that are fine. I don't have any question with those, but it does feel like there's potentially a possibility there for us to clarify investment policies of the utility that are consistent with our climate goals. So just flagging that as something we may want to come back to within the next year to provide targets or clarification there as well. But otherwise, I agree, second to approve consent calendar B.
Great point, Matt. All right, all those in favor of consent calendar B, say aye.
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 Great. Okay. We can move on to general business items if everyone's okay. We're a little bit behind in when our break is going to happen, but I think we can maybe we'll catch up or power through. But agenda item number 7, which is 2022 draft electric and water budgets and long-term financial plans update with Deborah Hart and Adam Rue.
Good evening and thank you, commissioners. I am Deborah Hart, the Chief Financial Officer. Adam Rue, the Fiscal Services Supervisor, is here with me this evening, and also available and on the line for questions are Senior Financial Analysts Alicia Voorhees and Ben Sachdeva. Slide. Tonight we are here to review the draft budgets and updates to the long-term financial plan, and also to hear feedback from the board. Our presentation is short and is really concentrated on the changes since the last time we shared this information with you. After we review those budgets and financial plans, we'll be looking to you for direction. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Adam to go ahead and jump right in.
Thanks, Deborah. I'll walk through a few slides related to the 2022 budget and financial plans for the water and electric utilities. So this slide is a high-level overview, and the more detailed budget will be presented next month with the board material. You can see the largest portion of the combined water and electric utility budget is the purchase power cost for the electric utility. The increase year over year is shown in the box to the right. It's roughly $20 million due to a number of factors. The higher volumes budgeted for trade activities, which is an effort to better align the budget and actual trade volumes. Higher prices in wholesale power markets. Last year's budget was roughly $29 a megawatt hour. This year's budget is around $51 a megawatt hour, and also higher volatility has been talked about recently is another factor. So these prices are applied to all index-based trade activities and open positions, which impact both purchase power and wholesale revenue. So wholesale revenue increased by roughly $28 million in the year-over-year budget. So the purchase power increase is offset. And since we're structurally long, the wholesale revenue is a bigger change than the purchase power. So the next largest segment of the combined budget is the other electric O&M increase year over year. There's a number of factors contributing to that. Higher technology upgrades for major systems such as the ERP system, and other upgrades in technology costs, as well as some different division changes. The energy division increased costs related to transmission wheeling, hydro generation facilities for things such as sink coal investigation, other resource management of resources, including construction agreements for wind and other generating facilities, as well as some resource adequacy efforts in the region. Some electric division changes year over year are items such as wildfire legal costs and consulting for wildfire mitigation, resiliency efforts, and some increased vegetation management, as well as some PUC related costs. There's also changes in our insurance costs, as well as a return of some of the training costs that were reduced in the pandemic shutdown. The other couple bars on this chart include higher capital costs for both water and electric utilities, which are were presented in July when you reviewed the capital plans. The water utilities O&M increased year over year, largely due to changes or the investments in the watershed protection that the board has reviewed earlier this year. So with that, we'll jump into the two utilities financial plans. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So the financial plans were last presented in July. Since that time, we have completed the preliminary budgets, and those have been incorporated as a new base year into the plan using these draft 2022 budgets. So after 5 consecutive years and 6 of the last 7 years with no overall rate increases for the electric utility, we do show increases in the revenue requirement next year and into the future. During the time we were able to hold rates constant over the last 5 years, we had CPI increases over 11%. Those cost increases were able to be absorbed through a combination of strategic use of reserves, debt restructuring, and cost savings measures. As you can see in this slide, we're much closer to board targets in terms of cash reserves and debt service coverage. So therefore, some of the options to mitigate future increases are limited relative to where we've been in the past. Since July, we've incorporated updated BPA rates for the current rate period, or for the upcoming rate period. Other power market factors were updated, which, as mentioned earlier, impact both purchase power and wholesale revenue. We corrected a revenue assumption related to the hydro forecast. We've updated the 2021 projected year-end performance and associated cash levels that flow into these metrics, as well as draft 2022 budget and revenue forecasts, and we refined assumptions around funding the capital plans related to issuance of debt, reserves, and rate funded for capital. So as you can see, all the metrics are above target throughout the plan. The highlighted yellow reflects when we approach 10% of the board target, and the rate trajectory as presented in July is within that CPI threshold we were using of the 23 to 33% over the 10-year period. With that, the next one is the next slide is the water utility. So the water utility has also not increased rates in the most recent 5 years, but is projecting increases in the revenue requirement for 2022 and subsequent years to fund significant investments in infrastructure. We've updated the assumptions for the water utility in a manner similar to the electric utility, using draft 2022 budgets as a base year and escalating beyond that. Water utility metrics are also above target. You can see the front loading of the rate increases ahead of the large debt issuance allows for the lowest rate trajectory we're able to come up with through the 10-year period. Even with the increases in the revenue requirement, though, you'll see the water utility is highly leveraged as we fund the second treatment plant. We'll be discussing that project later in the meeting, but the current plan includes the most recent projections for that facility. One change that has been incorporated based on some board feedback from July was related to the 2022 increase. This increase at the current level of 4% is required to fund normal capital expenditure even without the second treatment plant. So we pushed those incremental increases for the second treatment plant into 2022 and 2023 and 2024. Without the second source treatment plant, the rate trajectory is generally within the CPI guidance and would be expected to maintain our current group within the comparator, which is the second lowest among our comparable utilities. We projected out applying CPI to the other utilities and then this higher rate trajectory for second source, and that showed us moving from the second lowest to the third lowest among our comparators. So although the rate trajectory is a high in percentage terms, it left us still within that bottom quartile of our comparator groups. So we do continue to balance, affordability with the needed infrastructure investments into the future. So the next slide is next steps. So we have the public hearing and we'll incorporate feedback from the board and from any comments this evening. Or continue to develop our cost of service analysis, and with that bring back draft budget and price proposals in November and December. That's all
Great. Okay. So are there any, yes, Sonia, there are some questions.
President Schlossberg, could I just interrupt that? I think the normal protocol that we've used here is to go through the presentation, then have a public hearing, and then the board gets to do all kinds of, to have discussion after public hearing. I think that's what we've traditionally done on this. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's been what we've typically done in the past. That way the board can hear public testimony before they have their questions and comments.
Got it. Okay, so we will do that. So we will go on to agenda item number 8, which is public hearing on the 2022 budget assumptions and long-term financial plans. And I think that we only have one speaker who's signed up, and that's Mark Rabinowitz. Are you here still, Mark?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. So you've got
Okay, great.
3 minutes on the clock. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to throw a bit of a wild card in this. About 32 years ago, I took a course in how to use solar electricity. And the first lesson of the course was to use solar effectively, one has to use less electricity and to figure out ways to not use electricity. And the reason for mentioning this is you're considering a lot about electrification, which will supposedly solve the climate problems and pollution and so forth. Yet most people don't want to think about, well, where does electricity come from? And in Oregon, according to the Energy Information Administration of the US Department of Energy, most of the increase in Oregon over the past decade has been from natural gas. So we are burning natural gas in Boardman and Klamath Falls, then sending the electrons over the Cascades, which is not my view of how to reduce energy consumption. Your Commissioner Matt McRae mentioned that it's a bit late to deal with climate. We should have done this 30 years ago, which is an understatement. In 1990, the UN Environmental Program warned the 1990s were the decade of decision on the environment. I guess we decided. So for your long-term plan, it would be nice to think about how to use less energy, not more, less electricity, not more, and that we're not addicted to fossil fuels and minerals. We're totally dependent on them. They're more concentrated than anything else. They run airplanes, freight trains, food delivery trucks, forest firefightings, vaccine and computer chip manufacturing. And we're in the feedback loop stage now with deforestation and desertification, cutting the ability to even have hydropower like Oroville Dam in California. So it'd be nice to talk about limits to growth while making future projections that energy and the economy can grow forever on a round, finite planet. Otherwise, that's a form of denial that's even more popular than denying we're changing the climate by paving everything and cutting down the forests and putting fossil fuel byproducts into the atmosphere. So I'm sure some of you privately understand that, but it would be really nice to have a public discussion about what the ecologists call overshoot, that we have gone past our carrying capacity, and as fossil fuels deplete, it's all downhill. Finally, it's worth noting, also according to Energy Information Administration, that COVID closures did much more to reduce consumption than any climate policy ever did. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Okay, so That was our only speaker, so the public hearing part is closed. And we move on to the discussion about the electric and water budgets and the long-term financial plans. So Sonia.
Hi, I was just curious about what factors you used to account for inflation in the coming year. Just due to lots of supply chain challenges, it seems like that number is increasing. Did you use a typical kind of inflationary factor to apply, or was it something that was more targeted at the situation that we may be facing in the coming year due to continued supply chain challenges?
So we used a combination of factors. We typically project out a lot of the purchase power costs is separate than any inflationary adjustment. So we look at individual power contracts or wholesale markets for that. Capital costs incorporate some element of contingency planning, which presumably incorporates impacts of inflation escalation. And then we have a more detailed labor cost escalation incorporating individual costs for benefits and stuff. But for the kind of non-labor O&M costs, we did apply the typical 2% non-labor CPI escalation that we've used, and we looked at sensitivities around the potential impacts of higher levels of inflation and strategies to mitigate against that. So
how much wiggle room do we have there? I mean, if we see higher levels of costs, I mean, when do we start getting into trouble with our debt service coverage ratio, and how much wiggle room do we have from what's proposed to kind of where the model could take us?
So the way that we looked at it was the impact of higher levels of CPI impacting the non-labor O&M, and then looked at different factors that we have built-in conservatism into the plan, and just kind of how we could balance those different factors to meet the challenges. So I think it would be as kind of we went through the changes year over year and some of the incremental increase that we did, to the extent possible, incorporate changes, known changes going forward in costs that were going up. So those have been incorporated, but for the kind of unknown costs, we looked at how we would balance that with our conservative budget assumptions. Do you have anything to add?
Okay, if there, over the next couple of months as we go through this process, if there's any indication that, it would be better to even budget a little higher, just understanding that we're in a a varied state here of not kind of knowing, we have to overplan a little bit. I would be supportive of kind of having a bit more in the plan. Obviously, we don't want to spend that much, but just knowing that there's a lot more variance there right now with markets. Thank you. Appreciate all the work that goes into this. I know you guys do a great job.
Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, I would just like to add, Commissioner Carlson. So our rates are developed from our budget. And so if for some reason projections start to go above or below budget, there's a couple of mechanisms. We can adjust the activity we do, or at some point we can come back for a budget amendment to the board. If we over budget, then we're creating higher rates than necessary. And if we under budget, we're coming back to the board too often, which nobody, at least at the staff level, likes to do. And so we do have activities that we can adjust, especially on the capital side. We have quite a large percentage where we can adjust schedules. And then on a number of cases, we do have contingencies and flexibility built in. So we've got headroom both in activity and in dollars.
Great, thank you.
I'm imagining we have our own form of the EWEB kicker, which would be terrible. Okay, John Brown, I saw your hand up.
Thank you. And I agree with Commissioner Carlson about being erring on the side of maybe inflation going a little up. And Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you said, if inflation doesn't meet the 2% that you projected, it could be a 5% rate impact. If we experience 5% inflation over the next 2 years, I think that's stated on page 4.
Yeah, I was looking for that number. Thanks.
Yeah, and that's one little area of concern. And then other things that are more short term that are within this projection. I was reading that Debbie Wilson, general manager of Lane Electric, reaching out to Governor Brown about the spill lawsuit on the Snake River dams, and she's alleging that that could be up to a 5%. I think they're going to win, and that's going to be a 5% Bonneville rate spike, and that would be more immediate than not. And so that, coupled with the fact that I'm pretty sure that we're going to have Leeburg in here as an expense sometime within this projection period. I would just hope that we could go conservative. I remind other commissioners that we used to budget 90% water. We would assume there was only a 90% flow for the low water years because of generation. We don't do that anymore. We got away from that, and I know we used to have pretty robust conversations about the merits of dropping that in the budgeting process. So I would like to err on the side, not to err at all, but I'd like to be a little conservative here if I could. Thank you.
President Schlossberg, is it okay if I jump in? So I just want to be clear, Commissioner Brown, when you say err on the side of being conservative, that means raising rates more than we've projected. Just when if you want us to build numbers in, that's what conservative means to us. What I will say is that there is some risk with Bonneville and the federal lawsuit, which would require Bonneville to spill more water over the dams, thus lowering the amount of generation that comes from those facilities. And depending on your utility, that could be 5 to 10% of your power cost. Now, remember that the rate impact is slightly different than that, but that is a risk. We acknowledge that risk. We just don't know the timing on that as well. It is a lawsuit, and sometimes those go quickly and sometimes they take forever. So we can learn a little bit more about that for the next meeting and bring you back some feedback.
That'd be fine. Thank you.
Go ahead, Deborah.
Thank you. Commissioner Brown, I did just want to chime in that we did move to a contribution margin risk tolerance that represented both loss of load, price fall, or lower hydro conditions. And so we do still recognize the potential for a lower hydro, and that's adding about $8 million of cushion to the electric budget each year. And we did maintain for the electric utility a continued expectation that we would still see some lower usage due to COVID. So there are a couple of pockets of fairly significant dollars of conservatism that are built in for the upcoming year.
Thank you.
John Borofsky.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions. One goes to the inflationary pressures that on my thing is on page 73 of our board packet. So it said that if inflation was at 5% in non-labor O&M, are you saying 5% higher than the 3% that we're budgeting for, or 2% higher than we're budgeting for would cause a 2% rate increase for electric and a 5% rate increase for water?
So those are 5% instead of what we budgeted, the 2% we budgeted.
Well, no, I see down here 3% inflation on capital plan and contingencies. Is it 3 or is it 2?
Well, oh, sorry, it's 2% on the non-labor O&M and then 3% on the capital plan. So the capital is at a little bit higher rate.
Okay. My next question goes to the rate stabilization funds that we'll be drawing into. It's going to be 19 million on the electric and 10.5 $5 million on the water side in this plan. What effect will drawing that plan down? How much points of rate are we lowering by dipping into that fund $30 million?
So the rate impact of the draws on the rate stabilization fund?
Yeah, I mean, rate stabilization sounds to me like we're taking money from reserves so that we don't have to raise the rates quite as high. That's what rate stabilization fund means to me. So by taking, let's just take the electricity, by taking $20 million over the long-term plan, is that a half a point that we're saving in rates? Is that 1 point that we're saving in rate? What is that doing to reduce the rates?
I don't have that number handy because the way that it works in the financial plan is a little bit nuanced, where it impacts two factors in terms of the ratios, both the reserve balance, which becomes a pressure point in some years, and then the debt service coverage ratio. So we'd have to kind of model it without and get back to you for the dollar impact of not drawing down those reserves, or the rate impact of not drawing down those reserves.
Yeah, for me, that would be something that would be helpful going forward. If you're asking us to dip into the rate stabilization fund, I would like to know what that does to the rates. I mean, when it's called that, I want to make sure that it's doing what it's intended to do. And lastly, is the rate stabilization fund an separate fund, and what is the balance of the rate stabilization fund, or is that just part of our general reserves?
The rate stabilization fund is its own separate reserve. It was established and it has board targets, and at different times the board has added surplus revenue to the fund or sales of property. So the 19 million on the electric utility, for example, that we've scheduled to draw down is an amount that the board originally set aside to defer future borrowing while maintaining the board target minimum. We will run the effects of if we effectively had to borrow instead of draw down those funds, what that rate impact would be for both utilities. We can run that for you.
And do we have a balance of what the rate stabilization funds are? And you don't have to give that to me now. That can come back in a memo.
I'll include
Commissioner Borowski, I think it's a really appropriate question. I was going to reiterate the fact that these, especially on the electric side, it was intentionally built up for the Carmen Smith project a number of years ago. So the drawdown was actually part of the financial plan several years ago. So this is not as if we are doing this because we can't afford our operations. This was an intentional move from a financial planning perspective. But we will get you those numbers.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Matt.
Thanks, Mindy. What a great move to make a rate stabilization fund so that we can moderate rates. Just the foresight of this utility is really remarkable in my view. I want to say thanks to Mark Rabinowitz for your comments. I agree that continual growth on a finite planet seems like a real problem. I also agree that in order to get where we need to go, energy efficiency and conservation are essential. I appreciate Mark sticking around to provide his comments. Thank you also to Adam and Deborah. I don't know how you put so much information in such a short memo. It's super concise and clear, and without a ton of excessive jargon, and I really appreciate that. I do have a couple of clarifying questions about some of the assumptions. You have key assumptions, and there's just a couple of terms that I don't know. I wonder if you can clarify for me. So in attachment number 1, about halfway down, it says 51 megawatt hours melded mid-market price curve in 2022. I'm not sure what that means. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's typically an on and off peak prices that we'd look at for wholesale power activity. And so the melded price is just kind of the weighted average of that. So kind of a weighted average should be probably a more typical term for it, but we've just used this melded, and it's melded mid-C. Mid-C is on the Columbia, kind of the trading hub in the Northwest. So things you can buy and sell in different areas, but this mid-C trading hub's kind of the benchmark area that people would price power relative to.
Okay, great, thank you. And then,
Commissioner, I'd also add that the term melded originally came from the fact that it was melding multiple resources. So it was kind of a blend of everything, wind, hydro, thermal at the trading hub that Adam mentioned. So it's basically taking all the volatility and drawing a straight line through it and saying this is what we're calling melded.
Okay, great, thank you. And under that one, you have environmental commodities represent roughly $3 million. Can you remind me what environmental commodities we're talking about?
Sure, that's we used to have a line about RECs, where the renewable energy certificates, which are attributes of like wind projects that we would sell in wholesale markets if we didn't need them, to meet any compliance obligation for EWEB. We kind of broadened it a little bit because we were able to monetize clean fuel credits, which relate to electric vehicles. So the umbrella of environmental commodities now is kind of growing to include different things. And so the kind of more generic term, which could potentially include like carbon offsets or something, if that were a commodity that we were transacting in as well. But now it's mainly RECs and clean fuel credits.
Okay,
it's
great,
also going to be part of our new environmental product line, where we're going to offer to customers the ability to buy renewable energy credits. So it's part of that, but clean fuel credits and renewable energy credits is primarily what's included in that.
Okay, great, thank you. My time's out. I'd be interested in another round if there's time available. Thank you.
My questions have all been answered, but are there other people want another go around? Or yes, I'm seeing at least 2 yeses. Okay, great. So if you'd like another go around, we'll start with you, Matt, and then John Borofsky. I think you also had some more questions.
Great, thanks, Mindy. So on the rates, keeping rates flat, I think that keeping bills affordable is essential, and keeping rates reasonable is also essential. I would be interested in seeing discussion of bills alongside rates if that feels like it's reasonable and comparable. We always talk about rates and it's bills that people pay, and so I think to the extent that we can bring that into the conversation, I'd be interested in that. I also think that keeping rates flat is admirable, and it's a feat in my mind that this utility has been able to keep water and electric rates flat for several years in a row. And that said, I'm also interested in avoiding hikes in rates that are greater than the 2 or 3% rate of inflation whenever possible. I'm interested in seeing us smooth the rate hikes as much as possible. I think rate increases of 1% over a few years that prevents a 5% rate hike in any one year would be a good move. We have a number of financial targets that are very useful that you all have presented for us a number of times. I'm wondering if we might also establish a target ceiling for rate increases. I'm wondering if that's something that staff and other commissioners feel like would be useful as one of the ways that we try and manage finances. It would take advantage of the fact that we're doing multi-year financial plans. We could take advantage of that analysis and planning to try and manage rate increases over multiple years. And then I'll just reiterate that, to the extent that we can address bills in addition to rates, I think that would be useful. Thank you.
Go ahead, John Borofsky. I think you had something to say.
Yeah, it went to the same line about the melded price curve. I was just curious, and Deborah, maybe you can speak to this, but you're talking about it going at 51 megawatt hours melded in 2022 and decreasing to 47 by 2031. Why do you feel confident that we're going to have a decreasing cost of energy in the out years? I mean, everything's going up. Pressure on carbon, I think, is going to make it even more. I don't know. Just give me your thoughts how you feel that we're going to be going down in energy prices rather than up.
And I can jump in that first if and Deborah can add on if she wants. But I think what we've seen in the near term is what seems more like high volatility and price spikes. Looking at last year's, we were at a $29 a megawatt hour, which was trending up to something maybe closer to the $47 that we had last year. So we're not seeing as much volatility in kind of the second 5 years of the plan as we're seeing in the near term. So there's a number of factors contributing to kind of the this year and next year high prices and volatility. But the longer term trend seems to be at a roughly consistent spot year over year relative to what we're seeing this year.
That is also, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Commissioner Borofsky, sorry about that. There's in the near term, we're looking at volatility. You know, one thing Commissioner Brown talked about, conservative budgeting. When you're on average long on electricity, it is conservative to underprice the market. So it's probably on the conservative side, but we'll look at that in a little bit more detail, but between now and when we come back next month and try to give you a little bit of a feel for the relationship between what we see in the market versus you know, what we're projecting going forward, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, and that's fine. And this is an area, I mean, we're talking 10 years out. So that's where we can turn the dials, right? If we see the trend is not going the way that we are seeing it today, we're going to do this again next year. We're going to do the year after. And so that's where we can adjust those dials. I just wanted to know how we saw it trending downward rather than steady or upwards. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I would also just, Commissioner McCray, when we bring back our actual rate proposals, which is typically November and December, we will have the bill comparisons that you're looking for both water and electric, and then combined. And we do those comparators with other utilities. And then we do have in our rate making principles gradualism, and so which is basically the smoothing that you're looking for. And we're also going to be talking about a 3-year view instead of just a 1 year from a rate perspective. So a few things that I think you'll find in November that you don't get on this first view, but they'll be coming in that 100-page document that Commissioner Carlson described earlier. So.
All right, Sonia or John Brown, any last thoughts? All right, Adam and Deborah, did you get all that you needed from that?
I think we have a few takeaways to bring back more information on, but otherwise we're good. Adam, I should answer for you.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much for that presentation. So now we're at our much earned break. We have a 5-minute break, so it's 7:40 and we will be back here at 7:45. All right. Well, it looks like most of us are here. Just for the sake of time, we'll get going. We are on agenda item number 11, Water Utility Second Source Project with Karen Kelly and Wally McCullough.
Well, good evening, President Schlossberg, Commissioners, and General Manager Lawson. I'm Karen Kelly, Chief Operations Officer, and with me tonight is Wally McCullough, Water Engineering and Planning Supervisor. We hope you're rested because it's time to talk about water. We're excited to be here tonight and talk about the proposed second water treatment plant and associated transmission project, which serve as integral pieces to our source-to-tap model of providing safe drinking water to the City of Eugene and surrounding communities. In review of prior work on this project, I've seen planning date back to 2012. Your board materials covers a brief history of these efforts, and it has been known for a very long time that EWEB having a single source of water to serve a community of almost 200,000 people is an enormous vulnerability. In fact, we are the only water utility of this size in Oregon to have a single source of supply. The McKenzie River is an excellent source of water, but is vulnerable to harmful algal blooms, chemical spills, and wildfires. Just last week, there was a diesel tanker crash on the highway right next to the river that resulted in a spill. Fortunately, it was contained before entering the river, but this is yet another near miss in a long list of spills that we train to respond to, but have the capability to entirely shut down our drinking water production. And I don't need to remind you either of the Holiday Farm fire, nearly evacuating our Hayden Bridge water filtration plant, nor of the potential water quality impacts from the fire in our watershed. We were all witness to the impact of harmful algal blooms in the city of Salem's drinking water in 2018. In addition, we know that Hayden Bridge will not withstand a significant seismic event. It is time to address our vulnerabilities. Tonight, you will hear about the proposed project and how it will address these vulnerabilities, increase our resiliency, improve our operational flexibility and reliability, and protect our water rights and ensure our ability to meet growing water demands, all while keeping our rates among the lowest in the state, in fact, moving us from the second to the bottom to the fourth from the bottom in the list of our 15 comparators. We look forward to your input and direction on this critical strategic project. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to Wally to give you the details of our proposal.
Thank you, Karen. Good evening, commissioners. It's good to be back in front of you talking about second source, one of my favorite topics. I've talked to the board numerous times since, as well, Karen mentioned like 2012 or so, but I think the only commissioner that was there at that time was maybe John Brown. So apologize, John, if some of this might be a repeat. So next slide, please. Just kind of running through the quick review of the agenda. I want to touch a little bit on what differs the second source from the emergency water supply we've been working on. Kind of run through the quality, capacity, and reliability features of our proposed project. I'm going to touch briefly on two sources and then get into some of the costs and rates and some of the funding opportunities, kind of building upon what Deborah and Adam had talked about earlier. Then we'll hopefully talk next steps and get into some questions and discussion. Next slide. So over the last 4 years, probably, we've really focused on an emergency water supply program. And hopefully some of you pre-COVID were able to participate in some of our events that we've had down at Calpooya and Howard and different things. And this program, I want to kind of differentiate the two because oftentimes they're mentioned in the same memo, same CIP, second source, emergency water supply. But our emergency water supply is really about, we lose all water and we need to provide drinking water and to people at distribution points where they go to a point and pick up a jug of drinking water to take home. The second source is a totally different project and a total different scale. It's all about, we lose our primary source, which is Hayden Bridge, and it's about having water coming to your tap at your home and basically normal use of water and sanitation at your house. So it's much more substantial. Next slide. But kind of in a nutshell, the proposed project, it includes, you know, a new, robust, very reliable plant on the Willamette River, just downstream of the confluence of the Middle Fork and the Coast Fork, with a capacity to meet current minimum demands. It's located west of the river to provide as direct a connection into the EWEB system as possible. It includes a transmission system to deliver the water to the EWEB system near the Knickerbocker Bridge. And this was actually part of the, we acquired the path for this transmission system through our recent negotiations with SUB, where they needed an electric transmission on our property and vice versa for our water transmission across theirs. Getting into some of the details of the project, next slide. Respect to water quality, this has been a topic from the very start. You know, all of a sudden we're going from the McKenzie River to the Willamette River. We completed an in-depth sampling program at our proposed intake site on the Willamette River from 2013 to 2017. And, you know, we found a lot of contaminants, metals, pesticides, nutrients, herbicides, things like that. We're actually very similar to the McKenzie. Nearly low detect, very low levels of any of those elements. But as anticipated, there were differences in quite a few other areas. Bacteria, organics, color, turbidity, geosmin, which causes taste and odor, were all higher on the Willamette. And these were, you know, anticipated. But building upon those, you know, sampling results, we developed a kind of a process stream that can treat all of the raw water to better than regulatory requirements. This was a process we vetted through a kind of a public panel, a blue ribbon panel we brought in with some treatment experts and resiliency experts, and kind of worked through and developed that. And it's kind of shown here in this kind of graphic. On the contaminant slide, some of the red items are you know, items that we were kind of concerned about on the Willamette. We wanted to make sure we had features in our proposed process that treats for those algal toxins, the taste and odors coming from the geosmin, the PPCP, which those are pharmaceuticals and personal care products. We are downstream from a couple of small wastewater plants, so we want to be able to treat for those. And one I actually just added last week, which was kind of coming up in the world of water and wastewater, is PFAS, and I can't even say what it's polyfluoral alkyl something, and it's a series of man-made chemicals that it covers everything from non-stick frying pan coatings to firefighting foam that never leave the system. So we developed a treatment process and tried to get a multi-barrier approach to all of these contaminants. And hopefully there should be 2 green dots next to everything except a PFAS, which is still, you know, we're kind of reviewing that. The bottom is kind of our process train, and I highlighted in red some of the items that differ from Hayden Bridge. Several of you were at Hayden Bridge last week, I understand, and I'll just run through these kind of quickly. When you're out there at Hayden Bridge, and I know most everybody has, the big basins, the big 3 basins that look just big bodies of water, those are our flock and sed basins. And while they work well for McKenzie River water, they're very basic. And we actually go to direct filtration above, I think, 30 MGD at Hayden Bridge. Our new plant will have a very robust flock sed basin, which takes care of a lot of the turbidity in the water and a lot of particles. Probably the biggest feature is the addition of ozone. This is the addition of a gas into the water stream. It's a powerful oxidant which treats for a myriad of contaminants. And it's actually the process that Salem added, well, I think they're complete by now, is adding to their treatment plant after their algal toxin event of several years ago. And then a more robust filtration process. Instead of, we use anthracite at Hayden Bridge, it's a granular activated carbon, which has a lot of treatment capacity. Next slide. When we move on to the capacity, that's really related to water quality. When we started the project and developing a second source plant and our pre-design, we knew that the water quality had to be much better in regulatory and had to be better than Hayden Bridge, just for public perception. And we also knew that at some point in time there was a decision point whether we maintain that quality all the way up to our proposed flow of around 16 MGD, or maybe we let it drop off a little bit to after we get to some minimum initial to kind of our minimum flow that we thought we would need to continually operate the plant on a daily basis. And so that was around 10 million gallons per day. Minimum demand is around 16 million gallons per day. So our proposed project basically maintains this high level of water quality up to 10 MGD, and it kind of in the thinking and being compatible with how we would operate the plant above 10 during emergencies, we could really ramp up loading rates on those filters and those flock set basins and on the ozone system. And the water quality would drop a little bit. There'd be a few more contaminants in the water. You might get a little bit of taste, but it's still would always be well above regulatory requirements. And it's really a cost saving measure. If we sized all those process units to maintain that quality all the way through up to our 16 million gallon per day requirement, it's probably a 15 to 20% higher capital cost for the project. Go to the next slide. Kind of moving into reliability, and we touched on this on the background a little bit. You know, it's a lot more than the treatment plant. We want to be able to, first off, we need to get water out of the river. So how do we do that? And the key here on the Willamette is we have a pre-1909 claim on the Willamette River. And in 1909, if anybody knows, that's when water law first came into being in Oregon. So you get a claim in pre-1909, you're in good shape, but you need to register it. So we registered that claim with a date of first use in 1887. And it's one of the earliest claims on the Willamette River. And it gives us the ability to pull out 19 MGD at the intake site, and not being subject to any in-stream rights. So it's a very reliable claim. And we're actively managing that claim currently. We have point of diversions on this claim all the way from our intake site near the confluence all the way into North Eugene. And actually every year Delta Sand and Gravel uses our claim and uses water off of this claim to augment some of their water needs at their plant site. And we submit a report to Oregon Water Resources Department documenting use of this claim. It's all about just ensuring its future use. We also have a 2013 permit, which kind of increases the level of certainty on this claim and our ability to access water, but it's subject to the in-stream rights, so it's not quite as reliable. And I think I mentioned the in-stream rights came in 1983, so it's all about dates and timing with water rights and permits. Another item we're looking at is really because demand's going to increase, and the plant will be designed for future expansion, and because Eugene will grow at some point and our water demand will increase. So we're probably the best avenue right now we're looking at is access to federal stored water, and that's acquiring water, some of the water that's stored between the 13 Willamette Basin reservoirs. It's all been allocated for certain uses, and so we're actively pursuing this currently. There was some legislation that came out of Washington that facilitates this access last year, and I think just in the last 6 months in 2021 session in Oregon, House Bill 3031 was all about allowing municipal water providers to access this federal stored water. So another avenue we're working on to ensure reliability of the source. And next slide. The treatment plan itself, it's all redundancy and robustness of design. It's making this a reliable plant. It's designed to provide full capacity 24 hours after a regional event. But beyond just the design, that goes into the structural and mechanical systems and redundancy. It's also how we plan to operate the plant to ensure its reliability. And it's really, we want the plant, when we need it to run. It's a significant investment. So it's planned for daily operation, 5 MGD continuous supply into the system. And that's really just about, again, making it, when we start it, we want it to start and run and as an emergency reliable plant. Once we have the water, we do have to get it into our distribution system and to those faucets. So starting with the big pipes, we have numerous current planned projects to strengthen our transmission system, which you'll see on the next slide. But also we're, in the smaller pipes, the distribution system, and I kind of went over this a little bit in our CIP presentation in July. We're doubling our expenditures on main replacements over the next 10 years, and I anticipate they're going to double probably every 10 years after that for probably the next 50 years as we ramp up our main replacement program. Next slide. Lost my bullet here, but so getting into the, with this second source project, E will become a utility similar to many with 2 sources of supply. So since day one, 1911, we've had a single source providing water to Eugene. And as proposed, this, you can kind of see, I think that's the problem with Zoom, you can't have pointers or anything. So the kind of light blue is our service area, and I put a big entry point into the system. That's near the Knickerbocker Bridge. And all of the red lines you see are our existing transmission system. And Hayden Bridge is way off on the right side there. So as proposed, this water will enter into our transmission system near the Knickerbocker Bridge, and it would be, depending on time of year, if we maintain a constant 5 million gallons per day, it'll probably be between 40 and 80% of the water in that pipeline. And so what that means is South and West Eugene, just looking at the red lines, are receiving the bulk of the water from the new plant or the Willamette River, depending on how you look at it. And the McKenzie Hayden Bridge water would be almost, the North Eugene would see almost all Hayden Bridge water. So blending prior to entering the system is almost cost prohibitive. We would have to probably take a river crossing and a lot of pipeline, and testing has confirmed that the 2 sources will blend well in the distribution system. And it's really what most utilities with 2 sources do. They blend the water within the distribution system. Some people get water from one source, some people get water from another source. And the key message is it's all going to far exceed any of our regulatory requirements. So, but it's just, it's a message that we have to manage. So, next slide. Getting into costs, I put the expenditures that are included in our current CIP and the long-term financial plan and the table below, along with the activities associated with each, just so I can kind of elaborate on those a little bit. So 2022, 2023, that's really, we start in the current plan, we would start permitting, so pretty low dollar amounts in those 2 years. Really get into heavy design and finishing up permitting in 2024. And then the real high dollar amounts come in 25, 26, and 27, which we're anticipating a 3-year construction window. As Adam mentioned, with second source and these rates, looking at about a 57% compounded rate, 10 years. Without, it's around 36 or 37. Another thing I note is that, these costs are increasing. It has been asked in past board members, we used to have a $71 million project, and now we have a $90 million project. And it's really the inflation. It's the same project. The 71 million took the 2017 to 2021. We took actual construction cost indexes and increases and applied those, and then applied a 3% inflation rate to the time of construction, and we get the 90 million. I also want to note that these are capital costs. There's also some very minor costs in the long-term financial plan on the O&M side for staffing. There's, I think, 2 additional FTE are currently planned to help absorb the work on a second source plant that is in the long-term financial plan. Next slide. Funding. Obviously, any funding would help alleviate some of the pressure on these rates and these rate increases. But the one certainty I can say is that they're all evolving, and we're working on those to try and see what might work best for the second source plant. And there's various loan and grant opportunities, state revolving loan fund, SRF. Those are mostly loan, maybe some grant. I think those are more geared toward the smaller projects. Larger projects such as this, and where the next avenue would be the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, or finance folks call it WIFIA. That's more geared toward the larger projects and is used several places in Oregon on large infrastructure projects. It's a loan program with different kind of conditions on that, and if with a loan, it's really, we have to see, the advantage over our municipal bonds are really unclear. And I'm sure Deborah or Adam could elaborate more on that. There's probably other things. If anybody watches the news or opens the paper, you can hear all about all the wrangling around the infrastructure, different programs and options that are proposed. There's a lot of water and wastewater projects in there, or opportunities. We're not really sure what is going to happen with those at this time. One thing we are excited about is EWEB is adding a dedicated resource, also known as a person, to assist in pursue grant funding and help us kind of try and find some opportunities, both on this project and a lot of other projects we're working on. Next slide. Next steps. If the current approach and level of investment are supported, we think, first we need to go meet with the city of Springfield, kind of resolve the location and land use issues. This was kind of some of the hangups on the earlier efforts. There's new leadership at the city of Springfield. We've had a couple positive meetings with them already in 2021. We want to continue exploring partnership opportunities. Obviously, with the logical partner would be the Springfield Utility Board. Currently, they're focusing on building their new surface water plant on the McKenzie River. So that's where their efforts are going. Down the road sometime, when they're needing to upgrade their Willamette River plant, which will happen at some point, there could be some downstream opportunities there, but those discussions still have to occur and mature. But following really with the city of Springfield, it's really just permitting, land use permitting, and then pre-design and environmental permitting. That would be the longest, probably 3 years of environmental permitting, which is normal for building anything in river for an intake, and then design and construction. And with that, I would like to open up with questions, discussions. Next slide.
All right. Thank you very much, Wally and Karen. And Sonia, did I see your hand raised to start off with questions? Go ahead.
Sure, I had two quick questions. Well, first, thanks for the presentation. First question, when you say meet with the city of Springfield, is that staff meeting with the city of Springfield, or do you think there's discussions that board members need to have with the city of Springfield?
Well, our previous meetings had general manager level discussions with the city of Springfield.
Okay, great.
Carlson, and then, I would weigh in that it's important probably to have multiple levels. And so we're trying to understand the issues in the process with the city manager, but it is very likely that we will need the board's assistance in reaching out and working with the mayor and council of Springfield.
Okay. Second question, in regards to the differences between 2017 and 2021, have there been any plant changes or improvements? I think some of those other processes were added on in between when we first discussed this proposal and now. Is that correct, or is it the exact same plant that we were talking about in 2017?
It's the exact same plant that it was a robust, constantly running plant. We did in a scenario where we had an emergency only plant that was presented to the board as an option. This is the full plant.
Got it.
And it's the same plant. In fact, the figures from that were the two slides came from the 2017 Blue Ribbon panel, I think. So.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm at the point where we need to move forward with this. I'm supportive of biting the bullet and spending the money to make it happen. I don't think we're going to get there otherwise, but if there are any other thoughts on, public partnerships and how we work, I'm game, but I'm also not really willing to stall too much longer, especially when you see such cost increases. I'm also hopeful that, by the time we actually start building it, that some of those cost pressures that we're seeing right now with all the volatility around COVID and supply chain issues, that maybe some of that will work its way out, but I'll leave that to later. All right, thanks.
John Brown, I think I saw your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've been invested in this for many years. So a few questions, if I could. The intake, because I would very much like to have the intake above where the Coast Fork comes in, and that we wouldn't have to deal with Crestwell and Cottage Grove's effluent, and there's several dairy farms up there and other things. Is there any way we can get our intake to go upstream 1,000 feet and not have to draw water from the Coast Fork?
To move it upstream, we would have to go on to the Middle Fork, and it'll take definitely take some work. It's a different river, and
yeah,
I know on the Willamette, which we can move it up and down in the Willamette, but we would have to reduce our capacity to move it onto the Middle Fork.
Okay.
And that's what they did when we moved it upstream as far as we could to get above development on the Willamette. We actually had to give up, I think, 1.5 CFS out of our 30.9, so about an MGD. And we'd probably have to give up even more if we approached WRD about a point of diversion on the Middle Fork.
All right. Are you worried about temperature? Because I know the Coast Fork runs 75, 78 degrees in the summer. About the temperature of the water and how that, or will that all just blend in and not be an issue?
I know from our past preliminary design efforts, I do not recall that as being an issue as far as blending the water into our system.
Okay, and lastly on land use, I know that's what pretty much killed us last time, and the other John B may chime in on this, because I think it takes a Metro Plan amendment to get the Glenwood refinement plan changed to have a public facility designation off the commercial and industrial designation on that land. That's what, probably a couple of years. And it's very appealable through LUBA and all the other things. So do we run a risk of starting the design and all the permitting and all these other things, and then getting stranded with the land use issue, because that stranded us last time? Or does the second site, is it already zoned public land that we could buy from sub and alleviate that problem and facilitate it?
I think well, you're correct on the land use. We need to get on that as soon as possible. The second site has similar constraints as far as land use requirements. It still has to go on to the public facilities services plan, and still requires amendments to the Glenwood refinement plan and all that. The advantage to the second site that we negotiated with the city of Springfield, or sub with, is it really results in a consolidated utility footprint in Glenwood, which was the main, I think, one of the main drivers against the project in the first place.
Okay, and lastly, participation in watershed, like we do up in the McKenzie, watershed protection and everything. Since there's 2 utilities drawing their drinking water from that source, are we going to collaborate with sub to maybe do some collaborative work on watershed protection, the riparian areas and things such as that, or is that too far down the road to think about?
I think it's I don't believe those have been discussed yet, and we have to see how that all plays out.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have an answer. Karen, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I would just add that that's certainly our hope, because there are multiple agencies actually that would have an interest in protecting that source.
Thank you.
All right, John Borofsky.
Thank you. John Brown asked one of my questions regarding temperature. What elevation is this at? I mean, is it going to gravity feed to our reservoirs in South Eugene, or is it going to be pumped?
It would be pumped, just like our Hayden Bridge plant is.
Okay. So a couple of things jumped out to me. One of them was the fact that you think you can run this plant with 2 FTE. I went out to Seneca and saw them run a plant with 2 FTE, but a water filtration plant and only budgeting 2 FTE seems a little bit hopeful. I guess that's one question. Another thing that, again, I probably might need to meet with you guys one-on-one, because I'm new to this. This is a long-term plan that Sonia and John and Mindy and you people have been going over for a long time. So there's things in here that I don't really know about. The main pipe that you're planning on building back over the Willamette at the headquarters, is that going to have in-water implications as well?
No, the pipe that's I think it's, well, we can go back up a few slides and I could show, but there's the pipe between headquarters and Knickerbocker, which one of the blue lines, that's in construction right now.
No, I'm talking about the one that you have crossing the river from headquarters over to Hayden Bridge.
Yeah, that's the blue line going that way is actually a reuse of an old 30-inch line that we have that's still in place, and we were looking at slip lining that pipeline to provide a redundant crossing for both the river and I-5.
Okay. So water is going to come from the Willamette and serve South Eugene, my wards. It's going to be, by all you've represented, it's going to be cleaner than the McKenzie water that's coming out of Hayden Bridge. or higher quality. I won't say cleaner because all the water out of Hayden Bridge is very clean.
Yes.
A higher quality. But as John Brown mentioned, it may be at a higher temperature than what my customers are used to, right? It's not, when you say we're going to mix it, it's actually not going to be mixed with Mackenzie water, correct?
It will be mixed. We're only going to be putting in a constant, like 5 million gallons per day, we'll say, and say the orange line coming down next to I-5 from Hayden Bridge always has more than 5 MGD in it. So during a lot of the year, it's going to be probably 40 to 50% Mackenzie water and Willamette water in that pipeline after they tie together.
Okay.
During high demands it'll be more Mackenzie water. Low demands it'll be a higher percentage of Willamette water.
Okay. And at some point, it'd be nice to know what you feel the South Eugene area daily usage are, high and low demand. So if we're pumping 5 million out every day and we only use 3 million, it's all going to come from the Willamette, probably, right?
It's always the flow in that pipeline is always in excess of 5 million gallons per day.
Okay.
So it'll be, depending on time of year, between 40 and 80% of that pipeline will be Willamette water.
Okay, and I'm along with Sonia. I think it's time to build this. I will have other questions that we can do in one-on-ones that are just technical questions that aren't policy-driven questions. I'm definitely on board with resiliency and a second water treatment site, and I look forward to having more conversations about this in one-on-ones.
Yeah, and I just want to get one quick response to your 2 FTE question. And many modern treatment plants, water treatment plants, operate totally unmanned nowadays. They're really set up for remote operation, and this will be set up from mostly remote operation from Hayden Bridge, and it's just a little bit of more maintenance activities, but it'll be much more automated. So. Karen, I think you had something.
Yeah, well, you answered the question on the FTE, and I just wanted to add in on the temperature. The temperature can change within the distribution system depending on how long the water is in the pipes and in the storage system. So you may actually not see much change, and that's something that we can measure once the plant's online. We can actually measure those things and see if we need to make any changes to how the water is pumped through the system to alleviate any hot spots, so to speak. But I don't believe that's going to be an issue, and I know that it's not going to be an issue for the treatment plant.
All right, Matt, did you have any questions?
I do, thanks, Mindy. Quick question about the 2013 permit. Am I understanding it right that that's a water right in addition to the pre-1909 right that we have for 19 million gallons a day?
Yeah, it basically mimics that right, and it refers to that right, and it just, if for something ever happens to that claim, and again, it's kind of complicated. I mentioned in the backgrounder. So a claim, it has to be confirmed at some point in time. And it goes through a process of adjudication. And at some point in time, they will adjudicate the Willamette Basin. And I'm best guess maybe 50 years from now. And they're going to say, yep, this claim is good. We can use it as much as we want until then. They recently adjudicated the Klamath Basin, and it took 20 years to do that. And they haven't even planned to start the Willamette Basin. So, but in case some issue ever happened with that claim, we have a permit to fall back on. And then our hope is to build upon that permit on to offset any in-stream rights that might affect its reliability with our federal stored water. So we're kind of taking a multiple faceted approach to kind of ensuring we're always going to be able to take water out of here through some means. It'll either be the claim. We think it'll be the claim, but if it can't, it'll be the permit. And if the permit cut off, we can augment that with our federal stored water, which we're working on.
Okay, so it's basically hedging our bets, and they're overlapping. The claim and the permit are overlapping. They're not additive. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not additive.
Okay.
And
Thanks
they're
for the
actually
clarification.
set up. The claim, we can pull out 19 MGD right now, anytime, with no conditions. The permit actually subtracts that amount that we pull out from the Willamette from our water rights on the McKenzie. So, which is fine.
Okay.
We don't need both at the same time, but
Right.
They're all interrelated with the Water Resources Department.
Okay, and the reason I asked is that you said that in the memo, which was super helpful, thank you for this memo, that water from that permit is not expected to be available during at least some portion of most years and a large portion of time in very dry years. And I just don't know if that's something that we should be concerned about, or if that's not an issue.
It's and that's, we really need to manage and actively manage our claim to ensure its viability, into the future. And at some point in time, 50 years down the road, we need them to convert that into I'm really not even sure what a claim gets. It'll be a certificate, basically, after they adjudicate the entire Willamette Basin.
Okay.
So, but that's why we do need, and we're going to be pushing on getting this access to federal stored water. It's just those points in time where the in-stream rights came in 83, so it's all timing, and they do affect the permit that we got.
Okay, so I need a class in Water Law 101.
Frank? Most people do, and
yeah, Commissioner McCray, I was just
got a conference right here.
There's two things that are relevant really right now, and one of them is that at some point in the near future, we need to put the claims or the permits to beneficial use, and that will really help sort of put our stake in the ground, more than anything else. And the other thing is, this process is going to take decades. So somebody's going to make a career out of figuring out all the water rights on the Willamette, and it's way more complicated than the Klamath, and the Klamath took at least 20 years. And so the more we can do now to sort of put our stakes in the ground, put the claim or the permit to beneficial use, the better off our future generation's going to be.
Okay, great. Thanks for the clarification. I have a couple more questions, but I'm also out of time. So Mindy, if we want to do another round, great, or if not, that's okay too.
Well, I just have a quick question, and I apologize if you said this already or if it was in the background, but it's about earthquake. So if there was a major earthquake like we talked about Cascadia, would this plant be built like to different specifications than Hayden Bridge, or would we still be potentially be relying on our emergency water source?
Our goal with this plant is after a code level earthquake such as a Cascadia, it would be operable within 24 hours. Hayden Bridge would not. I mean, we've upgraded Hayden Bridge, but you can only, it's like fixing up an old car. I think I use that analogy. You can fix all the engine and mechanical parts of it, which we've done and added little features, but it's still a really old plant and you can only do so much to it. But this plant is a totally different design structurally. That's its criteria is 24 hours after that event that it'll be running.
Great. That's the only question I have. I don't know how many other questions you have, Matt, or if other people have questions, or if you want to maybe join John Borofsky on like a more of a 2-on-2 or whatever to get some more of those background questions answered. But I'm also happy if people want to add more time right now. I don't know what you're thinking.
Yeah, I'll just be really quick. I would love to join John. I was actually going to propose that. So if you do a tutorial, please include me. So John Borofsky and I can get up to speed at the same time. And then the other thing is I too am supportive of us continuing to move forward on this investment. So yeah, please carry on, and thanks for your work.
Yeah.
All right, so Karen and Wally, did you feel like you got what you needed from us?
I do, and I appreciate everybody's interest in this project and your support.
Yeah, likewise.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, we're in the home stretch here. Our next big agenda item is EWEB headquarters property disposition.
President Schlossberg, Commissioners, good evening. I am just going to, without a lot of background, I think you know the building we're talking about. If you don't, look at John Borofsky's background. I'm going to turn it over to Ann Kaw, who's our Administrative Services Manager in the GM office, who will walk you through where we are.
Good evening, Commissioners and General Manager Lawson. We're here tonight to talk with you about the future of EWEB's riverfront property. As a reminder, we've displayed some of the property's key information and history on the slide. You'll recall the General Manager came before the board in June requesting guidance from commissioners as to the potential disposition of the headquarters property. During that discussion, the board felt that more information was needed to make the best decision for EWEB and our customer owners. Commissioners also expressed a preference for the property to be used in ways that continue to serve our community. As anticipated, the conditions of the MGP purchase and sale agreement have been met, and as such, the City of Eugene has released their exclusive right to negotiate the purchase or transfer of the property under Eugene City Code. Having reached this milestone, management is now seeking the board's direction to guide next steps. Slide, please. In this evening's executive session, commissioners were provided financial data to inform their decision to sell the property in the near term or to retain this asset for a period of time. Responsive to commissioners' previous guidance, we've begun to explore the interest of government and community organizations. This preliminary outreach was focused on specific entities who we thought might have interest themselves or possibly knowledge of others who would, recognizing that a more robust outreach will be needed to fully understand the potential for the property and the community's interest. After our initial communications, we followed up with 16 of those organizations by providing a letter, information about the property, buildings, and equipment, and a survey of interest. This resulted in 4 meetings and tours with interested parties. To date, we've received 4 surveys of interest, 3 of which indicated actual interest in the property. According to EWEB's property management policies and procedures, if the city declines a surplus property, the opportunity may be afforded to other public agency within whose boundary that property lies. Once the board determines whether EWEB should sell or lease the property, we will reach out more broadly to advertise the property's available status and extend this opportunity to all community-focused and public agencies. Should commissioners choose to sell, we will work with the board to carry out an equitable and transparent process to select the offer that is in the best interest of the community, our customer owners, and EWEB. And next slide. Now that the board has received additional context to base their decisions, we'd like to hear your perspectives and receive direction to inform next steps. On the slide, we've displayed an array of questions for you to consider. At this time, we're happy to answer any questions you have about the property or the preliminary outreach. or if you have the information you need, we can jump right into the discussion and your feedback, in which case I'll turn it back over to President Schlossberg to manage the queue. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Is there anybody that has any questions that would like to go first? I'm not seeing anybody's hands raised. I think people are really tired, maybe. Any comments, any feedback? Anyone?
Oh, I'll jump in.
Great.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Thanks for the background and the tour that we were all able to take. I believe that this is a community asset that is, I hope we can utilize to its best extent, whether that is selling it to a public entity, selling it to a private entity who will give the public some sort of give back or public good to come out of it would be one of my hopes. Seeing it sit empty would be one of my worst outcomes. Just seeing it sitting there empty doesn't work for me. Whether we lease it or sell it, I just want to see bodies in the building because I think that goes to help maintain a building. An empty building deteriorates faster than a used building, believe it or not. So for whatever uses we do, whether it's a lease or a sale, just getting the best uses out of it is what I'm hoping for. What aspects of public purposes or benefits does the board consider most important? I think that needs to be flushed out. I think we talked in an executive session about there were other projects in our community that went through a similar type of a thing, and we can learn from them and maybe use some of the templates that were used on things like Civic Stadium and those types of things to learn from, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel on this thing. Other than that, I think it's one of the jewels of our community. We've got a new $17 million park that's going to be adjacent to it. We've got a lot of development that's going to be happening there. So I think that this property will fit in, hopefully, with the broader hopes and dreams that the community has for a renewed riverfront. So that's where I'm at for right now.
Thank you. John Brown.
I agree pretty much with what John B. also said. I do caution the board that if we get into a process where we're talking and trying to evaluate community values, I just don't want us to get in. I mean, Civic Stadium took over 10 years. The YMCA still isn't done because we're going to get lobbied by all the special interest groups. You know, there should be a museum, there should be an art museum, there should be education. All of those are equally important in my view, but how do you pick one over the other? Yeah, and so I caution that if we do this, that we put some sideboards on it to make sure that we can evaluate that, so we don't have this doesn't go on forever, because an empty building, that thing eats while we sleep. If we don't have money in it or people in it, it's not going to be good. So I would like to get people in it, whether it's a lease or a sale, and move forward. And like I say, I can help you with some templates that other public agencies have used. There's some really good evaluation criteria that the school district has used before, and things such as that. But I just hope that we can keep this in a time-sensitive manner, so we can say this is what's going to happen, this is when it's going to happen, and this is how it's going to happen. So I'm for moving forward with considering the disposition of the asset.
Frank, you want to respond?
Yes, commissioners. You know, one of the things that, I mean, we ask a number of open questions here, and it's always difficult to get direction when you have open questions. One of them that would be more directly that I would want to ask more directly is, we are a utility. Most of our focus is on water and electricity and not real estate management, although we do a lot of that just because we have to. I would submit that the board consider that this is something that we would want to sell, as opposed to continue to be a landlord. That my preference as a general manager would be to sell the building. But that is one thing that needs to be provided. That kind of direction needs to be provided from the board. And so if there's anything other than the sort of expeditious sale of the property, the details of how we do that can be worked out. But it would certainly be helpful for me to hear from the board that, yes, we would like to expeditiously sell the property, or not, or a different solution. But that's my preference, and it would be helpful to hear specific direction on that from the board.
Sonia.
Well, I'm not I haven't been through this process before in terms of, a large community project of this nature and how we dispose of it, or, who gets, I really like the idea of having sideboards on there, but I also don't want to throw out the opportunity to have creative solutions that really benefit our community. I do understand that selling it is, very easy and in line with what our electric kind of resource would be. And I'm not that I want to hold it in perpetuity, but it might be helpful for some of these community type groups that could be very beneficial. I really want to see people on the riverfront. I want to see people utilizing that property, and I want to see it be, public purpose if it can be. And if it can't be, I'm totally open to selling it, because that's also in the best interest of the community and our ratepayers. At the same time, there might be other opportunities out there that are more creative structures that don't just sell it outright, that do some sort of sharing that brings other community value. I look at one like the Science Center, the Eugene Science Center for one. Having a really robust education center that can draw people to the area, that can promote other types of art and industry around that building, something like OMSI and the groups that build around there. Like, that would be a really big benefit for the community, and it's really hard for me to see how we make that kind of a decision in an EWEB bubble. I mean, we really have to look at this as a community benefit perspective. I see John grinning there. But there is, so I really appreciate the opportunity to put sideboards around it. I don't want this to drag on for staff, but I also do want to make sure that whatever we land on, we do give those other kind of creative solutions and opportunities and a valid look. And I don't know how we do that in this process. These questions are actually really challenging for me to answer, because I want to know what the opportunities are and then be able to weigh them. And I don't know that these questions align with that for me right now. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Carlson, just to be clear, when I mentioned sell it, I didn't necessarily mean, oh, this goes to the highest bidder no matter what. I did mean that there's a public purpose consideration, whatever that looks like from the board.
Matt.
Thanks, Mindy, and thanks for the background on this. It's been super helpful. From my perspective, I think we should continue to prioritize selling to a public party if there's interest, but I don't have a strong feeling that we should hang on to the property for any extended period of time. I think I agree with John Brown that I don't want to we have so many big decisions on our plate. I don't want to see us wading into a big, long, drawn-out process of trying to figure out what's, what uses the community wants. I don't think we need to involve a bunch of public engagement in this decision. I think we should save our public engagement efforts for other decisions where we'll need more of that. I don't have strong feelings about selling separate parcels. To be honest, though, I'm not sure I understand the implications if we were to sell separate parcels. But my initial reaction is that doesn't really matter. And on the last question there, if we lease the property for some period of time, it makes sense that we would invest to make sure that the property doesn't degrade. But I don't imagine that it's of great value to the utility to make significant upgrades in the property. Those are my thoughts. Thanks for the time.
As for me, I look forward to getting the information that John Brown alluded to about how 4J School District did this and perhaps learning from them so that it doesn't take us 10 years, because I think that this is something that, while we don't want to be rash about, it'd be great to just get the ball rolling and move on this. And I agree with what everybody else said, so that's all I have to say.
Thank you, commissioners. I think one of the questions that we need to answer for the board are the details around the process. I know that this isn't something that we do. There's a number of different options. There's others that have been mentioned as examples, but I think we also need to be a little bit more clear as to the step-by-steps of how this might work. And so I think that's probably an action item that we need to do as staff before we ask much more of the board around the priorities and the directions. And so I kind of take that as a takeaway from our end.
Great, thank you. Okay, item number 13, correspondence and board agendas. Frank.
Thank you, President Schlossberg. There was a couple pieces of correspondence. One had to do with the city of Eugene and the fact that there was some work going on with regards to wards, and so that was just background. The other one I think we talked about more than enough, which was the meeting. So I'll really talk about the agenda more specifically. There are a couple of events coming up for the board. A work session on wildfire mitigation in October on the 19th, and then also a few days later, the tour of Finrock Reach and the repair work that's going on there. Both of those are, I think, exciting opportunities. There was probably two things that I wanted to point out about the agenda itself. In December, we added two things to the agenda. One was the annual board policy review that we mentioned earlier. And the other one, which Assistant General Manager Rod Price and I have been talking about significantly the last few weeks, is a 2022 goal setting work session. It'll probably be, we'll include it in the board meeting, but in past years, the general manager, me, I've been trying to bring the board my guess at the goals in January. And so this is an opportunity in December to start to formulate and work with the board on those goals before we enter the year. And so we've set aside some, and I think that's probably just good habit to get into, so we can have more alignment around that. So we've added some time to December specifically for goal setting for 2022. And by the way, thank you for approving the strategic plan earlier. That also, I added a clause in there that does tie that now into the annual goals. And so it's really sort of bringing those two things together. And so I wanted to make note to the board that we have added that into the December board meeting. The December board meeting is usually a big packet by page. and by volume, but usually the meetings are relatively short. And so we felt like there was an opportunity to add those 2 items in December. Other than that, President Schlossberg, I don't have anything else to add on those 2 items unless the board has questions.
Any questions, anyone? No. All right. Thank you. Phew, I don't know why maybe this meeting is longer than it's been in the past however many months, but this felt like a marathon. We are at board wrap up. So is there anyone that has anything that they would like to say in closing? John Brown.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank all the staff and the other commissioners for what I thought was a very informative and good discussion this evening. Just plant a seed that, you know, as we raise our rates, it's a financial windfall for the city because they get a benefit from silt, and they get all this money that's pretty much many times not in their budget. And maybe we should suggest that they could dedicate some of this money to achieving some of their climate recovery goals, like, you know, charging stations and things like that, and things, because I know that it's challenging for them financially, but if we're going to raise rates through, you know, and part of it's through that, they're going to get more money. And if it would be nice if we could at least suggest that they could use some of that money to achieve some of these goals, because I know that funding's been a challenge for them. So just planting that seed to see where it goes. Thank you.
John Borofsky.
Thank you. And thank you, like John said, to staff and everybody. So for me, being a new commissioner, a lot of the things that, you know, like the water treatment plant and these things, I feel I need to be brought up to speed a little bit more. So I hope there's going to be opportunities in the coming months when things like this arise that I can work with maybe Matt and staff and just, you know, come out to Rock and spend an hour or 2 digging into these things rather than a 2-minute question and answer at board meetings. That's definitely something I'd like to do with Deborah before the budget comes out, because, you know, I dig into budgets, and to go through it and really get my questions answered in this type of a format isn't the appropriate way to do it. For me to have a really robust and deep knowledge of what I'm being asked to sign off on. So I'm hoping that in the coming months that's something that we can avail ourselves of. And I just want to know what the process to get those things done would be, seeing how, you know, I'm still a newbie, I'm still a rookie.
Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, Commissioner Borofsky, I think this goes for any commissioner. If there's a particular subject that comes up in a meeting like you've just identified, we are more than willing to dedicate staff time to sit down with you as needed. I think that other commissioners through the years have found that there's opportunities to sit down, and all you have to do is mention what you mentioned, and we will reach out to you and schedule something, for example, with Deborah Hart, or with you and Commissioner McCrae on the history and direction for alternative water treatment plants. So you just mentioned 2, so we'll do that. And for all commissioners, if there's a particular area that is of interest or something that you feel like you need to learn more on, we're more than happy to do that. And we've tried to make that available through the years. And some of this stuff you learn through absorption over time, just through field trips and visits and discussions. But we recognize that that's an important thing for commissioner, an important really resource that we want to provide you. So we have 2 on the list right now. And if anybody else has anything through time or going forward that they need, just let us know.
Sonia.
I know that I utilized the pre-meeting questions very, very extensively in the first couple of years that I was here too. If it was helpful for me, I don't know if it would be for you, but because, you know, you only have a couple of minutes, and I would have 15, 20 questions, and it was helpful for me to be able to send those to staff and have them think about it and then actually write a response. That just, you know, something to think about. it really helped me get more up to speed and ask those questions without taking everybody else's time too.
We remember those days very fondly, Commissioner Carlson.
Yeah, and to that, that's a great idea, but a lot of times the board run doesn't really come out until Thursday or Friday before a Tuesday board meeting. And then for me to go through, dig through it and come up with those questions. In my industry, Fridays and Saturdays are usually pretty busy. And so being able to devote that time to it, it makes it difficult.
Yeah, I know. I'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning on Monday and read it for 3 hours. So I get it. Totally understand.
All right, other wrap-ups? Matt or Sonia?
No, just an observation that Sonia is hardcore getting up at 4:30 in the morning, and another word of appreciation to this group for being able to handle messy conversations. Much appreciated.
All right, just last thing for me, maybe per John Borofsky's request, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and you get the packet and you think you read through it, and then you're in the discussion and staff are looking for guidance, and you realize like, oh, there's a lot here I need a little bit more background on. So I'm just wondering, I don't want to put the burden on staff, but if you do have an agenda, like a media agenda item that you're looking for information on, maybe if we could figure out a way to be proactive to have some of those like one-on-one tutorials before a board meeting is going to happen. I know that, I don't know when staff prepares their PowerPoint presentations, but it doesn't have to be a presentation like this, just so that commissioners can go into the discussion feeling like they are a little bit up to speed. That's just an idea. And then
Yep.
last, go ahead, Frank.
I was just saying, President Schlossberg, there's a number of avenues for that. Some of it is just outreach, like we've talked about. One of the things we try to do with, I'll say, topics that are especially dense, is to have those discussions over a number of months. If you'll notice that we've talked capital plan and budgets and numbers now for a number of months. We talked about it again. Then next month in November, we'll bring something specific more about pricing, of which that'll repeat again in December. And sort of the same with a lot of these topics. And so we are recognizing that some of these subjects are just really deep, and a one or done kind of approach is going to be really difficult. But always, we don't have to do presentations. If there's times that someone just needs to sit down and chat about it, that's fine too. We can do that with 2 commissioners. We cannot do it with 3. And so we're more than open to do that. And if there's things that commissioners in particular, like I just heard this evening, we can facilitate that.
Great, thank you. And the last thing is, I just want to thank everybody. I think that we had a really productive discussion earlier in a way that we don't often have discussions. It was much more of a back and forth and sharing, and I just really appreciate all of you and staff for all the hard work and integrity that everybody brings. So on that note, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, commissioners. Have a good evening.
Everybody.
Thanks all.